Utterly drained, both physically and mentally, Luo Qingtong stepped back from the bedside, her body trembling with the sheer effort and concentration she had expended to save the Emperor's life. She had done it. Against all odds, against a poison designed to kill swiftly and silently, she had once again prevailed. As strength slowly seeped back into his ravaged body, the Emperor's eyes fluttered open, his gaze instantly locking onto Luo Qingtong. Profound gratitude shone in their depths, mingled with awe and a disconcerting flicker of something else, something calculating, something predatory, that made Luo Qingtong instinctively wary. "Thank you, Master Ziyi," he rasped, his voice still weak, but filled with genuine sincerity. "You have saved my life. I am eternally in your debt. I don't know how I can ever possibly repay such a profound kindness." Luo Qingtong inclined her head respectfully. "It was my duty, Your Majesty." A slow, unsettling smile spread across the Emperor's lips, a smile that sent a new wave of icy dread snaking down Luo Qingtong's spine. Duty? Or perhaps something more? Luo Qingtong's stomach lurched, the cold knot of fear twisting tighter in her gut. What was he implying? Leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, the Emperor continued, his gaze sharp, intense, and unnervingly knowing. "I've heard rumors, Master Ziyi. Rumors about your association with Ming Zun." Just as Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming were about to leave for the Shengyuan tournament, a messenger arrived, his face grim, bearing a sealed scroll. "By order of His Majesty, you are summoned to the palace." Immediately, Luo Qingtong's eyes narrowed, her intuition screaming danger. This was it. The Emperor's trap had been sprung. She glanced at Xiao Qianming, her heart clenching at the thought of leaving him. Even for a short time, Xiao Qianming, sensing her apprehension, reached out and took her hand, his touch a silent reassurance. "Be careful," he murmured, his voice low and filled with concern. "I'll be waiting for you." Luo Qingtong smiled, a genuine smile that warmed her eyes and softened the sharp angles of her face. "Don't worry," she replied, her voice laced with confidence. "I'll be back before you know it." But even as she uttered the words, a chilling premonition settled over her, a cold dread that whispered of treachery and deceit. As she followed the messenger out of the academy, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking towards her doom. But she refused to be cowed by fear. She would face whatever challenges lay ahead, head-on. Upon arriving at the palace, she was not taken to the Emperor's chambers as she had expected. Instead, she was led to a secluded, heavily guarded dungeon, the air thick with the stench of decay and despair. The heavy iron door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing ominously in the confined space. Luo Qingtong's eyes narrowed as she took in her surroundings. This was no ordinary summons. This was a prison. The Emperor hadn't called her here to heal him. He had called her here to break her. A slow, chilling smile curved her lips. Two could play at this game. Just as she was about to activate her soul technique and escape, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. It was the Emperor. He stood there, his expression cold and calculating, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Welcome, Master Ziyi," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I trust you're enjoying your accommodations." Luo Qingtong's eyes met his, her gaze unwavering. "They are adequate," she replied, her voice equally laced with sarcasm. "Though I must confess, I prefer more luxurious surroundings." The Emperor chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the confines of the dungeon. "I'm afraid luxury is a privilege you no longer enjoy, Master Ziyi. You see, you've made a grave mistake. A mistake that will cost you dearly." Luo Qingtong raised an eyebrow, her expression challenging. "And what mistake is that, Your Majesty?" "You lied to me," the Emperor hissed, his voice laced with venom. "You lied about your association with Ming Zun. And I, as you know, do not take kindly to being deceived." Luo Qingtong's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show any fear. "I've told you before, Your Majesty, there is nothing between Ming Zun and me." The Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You dare continue to lie to my face? Do you think I'm a fool?" "I wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty," Luo Qingtong replied, her voice smooth and even. "But perhaps you're the one being deceived. Perhaps someone has been feeding you false information, poisoning your mind against me for their own gain." The Emperor's face contorted with rage. "Silence. I will not tolerate your insolence. Guards! Seize her! 2 hulking guards stepped forward, their faces impassive, their movements swift and efficient as they grabbed Luo Qingtong's arms, pinning them behind her back. Luo Qingtong struggled against their hold, but it was no use. They were too strong. She glared at the emperor, her eyes blazing with defiance. You may imprison my body. Your Majesty, she hissed, but you will never break my spirit. The emperor smirked, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. We shall see about that, Master Ziyi. We shall see. He turned and left the dungeon, the heavy iron door clanging shut behind him, leaving Luo Qingtong alone in the darkness, the silence punctuated only by the drip. Drip, drip of water echoing through the cold, damp stone walls. Luo Qingtong stood there for a long moment, her mind racing, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. She had walked into a trap, and now she was paying the price. But she wouldn't give up. She wouldn't break. She would find a way out of this. She always did. Back at the academy, Xiao Qianming's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. He couldn't sit still, couldn't focus on anything, his mind consumed with worry for Luo Qingtong. He paced his room relentlessly, his small form a whirlwind of nervous energy. He had known, deep down, that something bad would happen. His premonition had been too strong. Too insistent, to ignore. Xiaozu, witnessing his master's escalating distress, tried yet again to offer words of comfort, though his own heart was heavy with foreboding. Master, please. You mustn't worry so. I'm sure she's all right. She's resourceful, you know. More resourceful than anyone I've ever met. I'm sure she'll find a way out of whatever trouble she's in. Just try to relax. Everything will be fine. You'll see. Xiao Qianming rounded on him, his voice sharp with frustration and the raw, ragged edge of panic. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who. He stopped abruptly, his cheeks flushing crimson. Xiaozu's eyes widened, his suspicions now beyond a doubt. Master Yu, he trailed off, still unable to articulate the words. Xiao Qianming, mortified by his accidental confession, desperately tried to cover. I didn't mean it like that. I'm simply concerned for her safety. As her appointed protector. It's my duty to be worried. It's perfectly normal. Anyone in my position would feel the same way. Xiaozu, however, was not fooled. He knew, with an ancient, intuitive certainty, that his master's feelings for Luo Qingtong were a tangled, complex web of admiration. Protectiveness, possessiveness, and something more. Something deeper, more profound, and infinitely more dangerous. He just prayed, for both their sakes, that those feelings were not reciprocated. It would only complicate matters, adding another layer of danger to their already precarious predicament. He forced a reassuring smile, patting Xiao Qianming on the head in a gesture of comfort. There, master. Don't you fret. I'm sure she'll be back any moment now. Safe and sound. Just try to relax. Everything will be all right. You just wait and see. But even as the words of comfort left his lips, a chilling premonition of impending doom tightened its icy grip around his heart. His intuition, honed over centuries of existence, screamed at him that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Alone in the darkness of the dungeon, Luo Qingtong stood silently, her mind racing, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The heavy iron door, a tangible symbol of her captivity, mocked her with its cold, unyielding strength. She had walked into a trap, a carefully laid snare woven from the emperor's lies and deceit. And now, she was paying the price. But she would not break. She would not yield. She would find a way out. She always did. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath, focusing on the flow of spiritual energy within her, seeking a weakness in the wards that bound her, a crack in the emperor's meticulously crafted prison. Back at the academy, Xiao Qianming's anxiety had escalated into a full-blown frenzy. He couldn't sit still, couldn't focus, his mind a whirlwind of terrifying images. Each one more horrifying than the last. He paced his room relentlessly, his small form a blur of nervous energy, his every thought consumed by worry for Luo Qingtong. He had known, deep down, that something like this would happen. His premonition had been too strong, too insistent, to ignore. Xiaozu, witnessing his master's escalating distress, made another valiant, yet ultimately futile, attempt to offer words of comfort. Master, please, you mustn't allow yourself to be consumed by worry. I'm sure she's perfectly fine. You know how resourceful she is. More resourceful than anyone I've ever met. I'm certain she'll find a way out of whatever trouble she's in. Just try to relax. Everything will be fine. You'll see. Xiao Qianming rounded on him, his voice sharp with frustration and the raw, ragged edge of panic. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who's. He stopped abruptly, his cheeks flushing crimson. Xiao Zu's eyes widened, his suspicions now beyond doubt. Master Yu, he trailed off, still unable to articulate the words that danced on the tip of his tongue. The words that would change everything. Xiao Qianming, mortified by his accidental confession, desperately tried to cover, his voice a high-pitched squeak. I didn't mean it like that. I'm simply concerned about her safety. As her appointed protector, it's my duty to worry about her well-being. It's perfectly normal. Anyone in my position would be worried. Xiao Zu, however, was not fooled. He knew, with an ancient, intuitive certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that his master's feelings for Luo Qingtong were far more complex. Far more profound than mere concern. They were a tangled, intricate web, woven with threads of admiration, respect, protectiveness, possessiveness, and something more. Something deeper, something unspoken, something infinitely more dangerous. He prayed, for both their sakes, that those feelings were not reciprocated. It would only complicate matters further, adding another layer of danger to their already precarious predicament. He forced a reassuring smile, patting Xiao Qianming on the head, in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. There, master. Don't you fret. I'm sure she'll be back any moment now. Safe and sound. Just try to relax. Everything will be all right. You'll see. But even as the words of comfort left his lips, an icy premonition of impending doom tightened its grip around his heart, squeezing the breath from his lungs. His intuition, honed over centuries of existence, screamed at him that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Deep within the cold, damp confines of the imperial dungeon, Luo Qingtong stood silently, the heavy iron door a stark reminder of her captivity. The air was thick with the stench of decay and despair. The oppressive silence broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the dimly lit chamber. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. Focusing on the flow of spiritual energy within her, searching for a weakness in the wards that bound her, a crack in the emperor's meticulously crafted prison. She had walked into a trap, a carefully laid snare woven from the emperor's lies and deceit. And now, she was paying the price. But she would not break. She would not yield. She would find a way out. She always did. Back at the academy, Xiao Qianming's anxiety had escalated into a full-blown frenzy, a maelstrom of fear and worry that threatened to consume him entirely. He couldn't sit still. Couldn't focus on anything, his mind a whirlwind of horrifying images, each more gruesome and terrifying than the last. He paced his room relentlessly, his small form a blur of nervous energy. Every thought, every breath, consumed by the desperate need to know that Luo Qingtong was safe. He had known, deep down, that something like this would happen. His premonition had been too strong, too insistent, to ignore. He cursed himself for not stopping her, for not going with her, for not protecting her from the emperor's treachery. Xiao Zu, witnessing his master's escalating distress, made another valiant, yet ultimately futile, attempt to offer words of comfort, though his own heart was heavy with a growing sense of foreboding. Master, please, you mustn't allow yourself to be consumed by worry. I'm sure she's all right. You know how resourceful she is. More resourceful than anyone I've ever met. I'm certain she'll find a way out of whatever trouble she's in. Just try to relax. Everything will be fine. You'll see. Xiao Qianming rounded on him, his voice sharp with frustration and the raw, ragged edge of panic. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who's. He stopped abruptly, his cheeks flushing crimson. Xiao Zu's eyes widened, his suspicions now beyond a shadow of a doubt. Master Yu, he trailed off, still unable to articulate the words that hovered on the tip of his tongue. The words that would change everything between them. Xiao Qianming, mortified by his accidental confession, desperately tried to cover, his voice a high-pitched squeak. I didn't mean it like that. I'm simply concerned for her safety. As her appointed protector, it's my duty to be worried. It's perfectly normal. Anyone in my position would feel the same way. Xiao Zhu, however, was not fooled. He knew, with an ancient, intuitive certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that his master's feelings for Luo Qingtong ran far deeper. Far more complex than mere concern. They were a tangled, intricate web, woven with threads of admiration, respect, protectiveness, possessiveness, and a potent undercurrent of something more. Something deeper, something unspoken, something infinitely more dangerous. He prayed, for both their sakes, that those feelings were not reciprocated. It would only complicate matters further, adding another layer of danger to their already precarious predicament. He forced a reassuring smile, patting Xiao Qianming on the head, in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. There, master. Don't you fret. I'm sure she'll be back any moment now. Safe and sound. Just try to relax. Everything will be all right. You'll see. But even as the words of comfort left his lips, an icy premonition of impending doom tightened its grip around his heart, squeezing the breath from his lungs. His intuition, honed over centuries of existence, screamed at him that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Meanwhile, in the cold, damp confines of the imperial dungeon, Luo Qingtong continued to probe the wards that held her captive, searching for a weakness, a vulnerability. A single crack in the emperor's meticulously crafted prison. She knew time was of the essence. Xiao Qianming would be worried. And she had a score to settle with the emperor. The emperor paced back and forth outside the dungeon, his face a mask of frustration. He had underestimated Zi Guitong. He had expected her to break under the pressure of his interrogation, to reveal the secrets he so desperately craved. But she had remained stubbornly silent, her defiance infuriating him. He had offered her power, wealth, prestige, everything she could ever want. All she had to do was tell him what he wanted to know. But she had refused. She had chosen imprisonment and torture over betraying Ming Zun. Why? He muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. Why is she so loyal to him? He couldn't understand it. What hold did Ming Zun have over her? What could he possibly offer her that he, the emperor of the Qianyu Empire, could not? He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as a new thought occurred to him. Perhaps it wasn't loyalty. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps she was afraid of what Ming Zun would do to her if she betrayed him. A cruel smile spread across his lips. Fear was a powerful motivator. And fear was something he could exploit. He turned and strode back towards the dungeon, his mind already churning with new, more insidious methods of interrogation. He would break her. He would get the information he wanted. One way or another. Back at the academy, Xiao Qianming's anxiety had become almost unbearable. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to Luo Qingtong. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and wait. He turned to Xiao Zhu, his voice desperate. We have to go after her. We have to find her. Xiao Zhu, his own fear mirroring his master's, wrung his hands nervously. But master, we don't even know where she is. And even if we did, the palace is heavily guarded. We'd never get past the royal guards. Xiao Qianming's eyes blazed with determination. Then we'll find a way. I won't let anything happen to her. I won't. He stormed out of the room, Xiao Zhu trailing anxiously behind him. Deep within the dungeon, Luo Qingtong remained defiant, refusing to yield to the emperor's relentless interrogation. She had endured hours of torture, her body battered and bruised. But her spirit remained unbroken. The emperor, his patience wearing thin, resorted to increasingly brutal methods, but Luo Qingtong remained silent, her lips sealed, her eyes blazing with unwavering defiance. Very well, the emperor finally snarled, his voice laced with frustrated rage. If you won't speak, then you will die. He raised his hand, his spiritual energy coalescing into a deadly ball of energy, ready to strike the final, fatal blow. Just as the emperor was about to unleash his fatal blow, a powerful force slammed into him, knocking him back and shattering his concentration. The energy ball dissipated harmlessly into the air. A figure materialized in the dungeon, standing protectively in front of Luo Qingtong, shielding her from the emperor's wrath. It was Yi Qianming. His eyes blazed with fury, his spiritual energy crackling around him like a live wire. You dare touch her? He snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The emperor, stunned by his sudden appearance, staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ming Zun. He gasped, his voice laced with fear. Yi Qianming didn't reply. He simply raised his hand, his spiritual energy coalescing into a blindingly bright blade of pure energy, ready to strike. The emperor, realizing the imminent danger, unleashed his own power, his spiritual energy forming a protective shield around him. The two forces collided, the resulting explosion shaking the very foundations of the dungeon. Just then, Xiao Qianming and Xiao Zhu burst into the dungeon, their faces pale with worry, their eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Luo Qingtong. Xiao Qianming cried out, rushing towards her, his heart pounding with relief at seeing her alive, albeit imprisoned. Xiao Zhu, however, was not so easily reassured. He could sense the immense power radiating from both Yi Qianming and the emperor, a power that dwarfed his own. Master! Be careful! These two are our monsters. Luo Qingtong, her heart aching at the sight of Xiao Qianming's concern, forced a reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'm fine. Just a little tied up at the moment. She glanced at Yi Qianming. Her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that made her cheeks flush slightly. The battle between Yi Qianming and the emperor raged on, their powers clashing in a spectacular display of light and sound, the very air crackling with energy. The dungeon walls trembled, threatening to collapse under the strain. Xiao Qianming, ignoring Xiao Zhu's frantic warnings, joined the fray, his small form a whirlwind of motion as he darted between the two titans, his attacks surprisingly effective despite his size. Xiao Zhu, seeing his master's reckless abandon, could only watch in horror, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he should be helping, but the sheer power of the two combatants was terrifying. He could feel the oppressive weight of their spiritual energy pressing down on him, making it difficult to even breathe. He closed his eyes, muttering a silent prayer to the ancient gods. Please, let them be all right. Please. Yi Qianming, despite his overwhelming power, was starting to tire. The emperor, fueled by his rage and desperation, was relentless in his attacks. He had underestimated Ming Zun's strength. But he was determined to win, no matter the cost. Just as the emperor was about to land a decisive blow, Xiao Qianming intervened, his small body intercepting the attack, taking the full force of the emperor's power. Xiao Qianming! Luo Qingtong screamed, her voice filled with anguish. Yi Qianming's eyes widened in horror, as he saw Xiao Qianming collapse to the ground, his small form broken and still. A primal rage, unlike anything he had ever experienced, consumed him. He roared, his voice echoing through the dungeon, his spiritual energy exploding outwards in a devastating shockwave that sent the emperor and his guards sprawling. He turned his fury on the emperor, his attacks relentless, merciless, each strike infused with the raw power of his grief and rage. The emperor, caught off guard by the sudden surge in Yi Qianming's power, could barely defend himself. Luo Qingtong, seeing Xiao Qianming's lifeless form, felt a wave of despair wash over her, threatening to drown her in its icy depths. But then, she remembered Xiao Bai's words. His soul is still intact. There was still a chance. A small, flickering flame of hope ignited within her, pushing back the darkness. She wouldn't let him die. Not like this. Gathering her remaining strength, she began to work, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she prepared the medicine that would heal his wounds and mend his broken body. Meanwhile, Yi Qianming continued his relentless assault on the emperor, his attacks growing more and more ferocious with each passing moment. The emperor, weakened and battered, could only defend himself, his own attacks becoming increasingly desperate. Finally, with a final, devastating blow, Yi Qianming brought the emperor to his knees. He stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with cold fury. It's over, he growled, his voice low and menacing. Your reign of terror ends now. The emperor, his face pale and contorted with pain, could only stare up at him, his eyes filled with fear and hatred. Just as Yi Qianming was about to deliver the final blow, Luo Qingtong's voice rang out, stopping him. Wait! Yi Qianming turned to look at her, his eyes questioning. Luo Qingtong approached him, her face pale but resolute. He needs to be alive, she said, her voice firm. He needs to answer for his crimes. Yi Qianming hesitated, his hand still raised, his spiritual energy crackling around him. He wanted to kill the emperor, to avenge Xiao Qianming's sacrifice. But he also knew that Luo Qingtong was Right? The emperor needed to be brought to justice. He lowered his hand, his spiritual energy dissipating. Very well, he said, his voice still laced with anger. But he will pay for what he has done. Luo Qingtong nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. She turned her attention back to Xiao Qianming, her heart aching at the sight of his still form. She would save him. She had to. As she worked, Yi Qianming watched her, his heart filled with a complex mix of emotions. Relief that she was safe. Gratitude for her intervention. Admiration for her strength and skill. And a growing realization of the depth of his feelings for her, opened a moment later, revealing an 8-character mustached middle-aged man, Qingtong. The Imperial Pharmacy's 8-character mustached physician, Yi Fu, acted high and mighty. The moment the box opened, the medicinal fragrance captivated the 8-character mustache, his heart filled with unknown excitement. This is a quasi-heavenly grade medicinal liquid. The trembling of his fingers revealed his inner excitement. A sinister smile appeared on his face. This medicinal liquid is indeed of exceptional quality. It's an Earth-grade top-tier medicinal liquid. He observed intently, observing Qingtong's lack of reaction. He wondered how to obtain the prescription. You all wait here. The man turned and left with the medicinal liquid. Qingtong's eyes turned cold and sharp, a murderous aura emanating from him. The 8-character mustache exited the room. In a flash, he hid behind a pillar. This medicinal liquid's superlative refining technique and unique medicinal properties must have been coincidentally created by that person. It just so happens that Master is collecting medicinal ingredients for damaged meridians. This is a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. When the lake was returned to its original place, Qingtong accepted the medicinal liquid and circulated his power, only to find it sealed. The 8-character mustache insisted that the liquid was fake. Qingtong, eyes icy cold, threw down the liquid and turned to leave. Xiaozu was indignant. Why didn't you expose him on the spot? Qingtong, however, told him to wait for the good show. Don't assume that medicinal liquid is so amazing. He's going to a much more interesting place now. The man's hand quickly recovered. In an instant, it transformed into 3 fingers. Inside the bamboo manor, Mingzun held the medicinal liquid, his face grim. This medicinal leaf, was it refined by you? The 8-character mustache knelt. With a smug expression on his face, he claimed, it was this subordinate, who stumbled upon an ancient competition ground and refined it there. Mingzun's expression turned icy. He questioned sharply, who gave you the formula? These words stunned the 8-character mustache. Mingzun's gaze grew colder. Where did you get it? You couldn't possibly formulate such a high-level medicinal liquid. The 8-character mustache realized the situation was dire. Just as he was about to speak, his palm emitted a black mist. The 8-character mustache cried out in pain. It was that black-robed man. It was him. I was wrong. I'll go find him now. Could that black-robed man be related to that woman? Mingzun watched intently. Bei Qing, you dispatch some men to follow Tang. Also, summon the auction house's head manager. Here. Feng Yu was puzzled. Why was Master acting this way? Mingzun tossed the medicinal liquid to him. The moment Feng Yu opened it, his eyes widened. This is the same as Master's healing medicinal liquid. The composition is identical, although the formula has been slightly improved. If that woman has seen or used it, it's not entirely impossible. Feng Yu thought to himself, if it's that woman, this subordinate will definitely find her. Inside the bloody arena, a sea of people roared. Qingtong's figure caught the attention of a courtesan. Xiaozu couldn't understand why the woman had come here. Qingtong, however, had a mysterious air about him. The courtesan leaned against Qingtong. Gentlemen, looking for a room, or something else? Qingtong firmly gripped her hand. I don't like being touched. Understand. The courtesan, pained, pleaded. Please, let go. The courtesan turned to whisper to Qingtong. Don't like women. Do you prefer? At that moment, on the arena stage, a burly man was being pummeled by a skinny man. Blows landed squarely, beating the burly man. Without a chance to retaliate, Qingtong pointed at the burly man. I'll buy him 4 gold. These words stunned the courtesan. Qingtong saw the courtesan's hesitation. You only need to introduce him to me. I'll buy him. Just as the skinny man raised his hands in celebration of victory, Qingtong walked to the burly man. Do you want to live? The man looked at Qingtong with bloody eyes, smiling sinisterly. Qingtong circulated his power, thinking to himself, "Want me to save you? Save you. Surrender to me, and I will." The burly man suddenly straightened up, surging power coursing through his body. A roar erupted from his throat as he lunged at the skinny man, instantly pinning him to the ground. The skinny man instantly turned into a pool of blood. He roared furiously, his madness intensifying, his entire body emitting a terrifying aura. He collapsed to the ground. Luo Qingtong looked at the courtesan. "Have your manager prepare the money." The courtesan explained, "He has to be alive to win." "Now, it's a draw," Qingtong sneered. "Who says he's dead?" He approached the arena. He poured a green liquid into the man's mouth, and massaged his body for a while. The man swayed unsteadily, standing up. The crowd wondered what the black-robed person had given him. He looked at the stunned referee. "Now you can declare him the winner." As the referee brought down the gavel, the crowd erupted in cheers. "How may I address you?" "Regardless of the price, I must have your medicinal liquid." A triumphant smirk spread across Qingtong's lips. "Call me Ziyi Gui Tong." He watched as Luo Qingtong gently cupped Xiao Qianming's face in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she channeled her healing energy into his broken body. He watched as Xiao Qianming's color slowly returned, his breathing becoming deeper, more regular. He watched as Luo Qingtong's exhaustion became more and more apparent. Her movements growing sluggish, her body trembling with the effort she was expending. He knew he should step in, should offer his assistance, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt, to break the spell that seemed to have woven itself around them. He could only stand there, silently watching, his heart aching with a love he hadn't yet fully acknowledged, a love that both terrified and exhilarated him. Xiao Zhu, sensing his master's internal struggle, shifted nervously from foot to foot. He wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort or encouragement. But he didn't dare interrupt. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that transcended his diminutive form, that this was a moment between Master and Luo Qingtong, a moment that was both fragile and profound. A moment that could change everything. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Luo Qingtong pulled back, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes shining with relief. Xiao Qianming stirred. His eyelids fluttering open, his gaze locking onto Luo Qingtong's. "Luo Qingtong," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. Luo Qingtong's heart soared at the sound of his voice. He was alive. He was going to be okay. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She reached out, her hand trembling as she gently brushed a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." Xiao Qianming's lips curved into a weak smile. "I knew you'd come," he murmured, his eyes closing again, his body relaxing into the soft embrace of sleep. Luo Qingtong watched over him, her heart filled with a profound sense of relief and a burgeoning warmth that she couldn't quite name. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had perhaps saved herself. Yi Qianming approached them, his gaze softening as he looked at Luo Qingtong and the sleeping Xiao Qianming. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over Luo Qingtong's shoulder. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her how much he admired her strength and courage, but he stopped himself, unsure of how she would react. Luo Qingtong, sensing his presence, looked up at him, her eyes filled with a silent gratitude that spoke volumes. Yi Qianming's heart ached at the vulnerability in her gaze. He knew, in that moment, that he would do anything to protect her, to keep her safe from harm. He had never felt this way about anyone before. He watched as she gently cupped Xiao Qianming's face in her hands, her brow furrowed with concern as she channeled her healing energy into his broken body. He watched as the color slowly returned to Xiao Qianming's cheeks, as his breathing deepened and became more regular. He watched as Luo Qingtong's exhaustion became more and more apparent, her movements growing sluggish, her body trembling with the effort she was expending. He knew he should step in, should offer his assistance, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt, to break the spell that seemed to have woven itself around them. He could only stand there, silently watching, his heart aching with a love he hadn't yet fully acknowledged, a love that both terrified and exhilarated him. Xiao Zhu, sensing his master's internal struggle, shifted nervously from foot to foot. He wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort or encouragement. But he didn't dare interrupt. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that transcended his diminutive form, that this was a private moment between his master and Luo Qingtong. A moment that was both fragile and profound, a moment that could change everything. I won't let them harm you, Luo Qingtong, Yi Qianming vowed, his voice a low, dangerous growl, his eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive protectiveness that surprised even himself. He would burn the world to ashes, if that's what it took to keep her safe. He would destroy anyone who dared to lay a finger on her. He suddenly realized the depth of his feelings for her. A realization that both thrilled and terrified him. He loved her. He loved Luo Qingtong. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs and leaving him momentarily stunned. He loved her. The thought echoed in his mind. A strange mix of terror and exhilaration, a feeling so foreign, so unfamiliar, yet so undeniably right. He loved Luo Qingtong. The cunning, mischievous, infuriatingly talented woman who had turned his world upside down, who had challenged him, defied him, and ultimately stolen his heart. He watched as she continued to heal Xiao Qianming, her brow furrowed in concentration, her slender fingers glowing with a soft, healing light. He watched as the color slowly returned to Xiao Qianming's face, as his breathing evened out, as his pulse grew stronger. He watched as Luo Qingtong's exhaustion became more and more pronounced, her movements growing sluggish. Her body trembling with the effort she was expending. He knew he should intervene, should offer his assistance, but he couldn't bring himself to break the spell that seemed to have woven itself around them, a silent, intimate moment shared between healer and patient, a moment that held a power and a vulnerability that he couldn't bear to disturb. He could only stand there, silently watching, his heart aching with a love he had only just acknowledged, a love that both terrified and exhilarated him, a love that he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, would change everything. Xiaozu, sensing his master's inner turmoil, shifted nervously from foot to foot, his small form radiating a palpable aura of anxiety. He wanted to say something. Anything, to break the heavy silence, to offer words of comfort or encouragement, but he didn't dare. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that belied his diminutive form, that this was a private moment between Luo Qingtong and his master, a moment that was both fragile and profound, a moment that held the potential to change the course of their lives. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Luo Qingtong pulled back, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes shining with relief. Xiao Qianming stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, his gaze instantly locking onto Luo Qingtong's. Luo Qingtong, he whispered, his voice weak and raspy, but filled with an undeniable warmth that made her heart ache. Relief washed over Luo Qingtong at the sound of his voice. He was alive. He was going to be okay. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, as she gently brushed a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." Xiao Qianming's lips curved into a small, weak smile. "I knew you'd come," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed once more, his body relaxing into the soft embrace of sleep. He was safe. He was with her. That was all that mattered. Luo Qingtong watched over him, her heart filled with a profound sense of relief and a burgeoning warmth that she finally allowed herself to acknowledge. It was more than just concern. More than just gratitude. It was affection. She cared for him. Deeply. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had perhaps saved a part of herself as well. Yi Qianming approached them, his usual cold demeanor softened by the tenderness in his gaze, as he looked at Luo Qingtong and the sleeping Xiao Qianming. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over Luo Qingtong's shoulder. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her how much he admired her strength and courage, but he stopped himself, unsure of how she would react to his touch, to his unspoken feelings. Luo Qingtong, sensing his presence, looked up at him, her eyes filled with a silent gratitude that spoke volumes. She didn't need words. He understood. Yi Qianming's heart ached at the vulnerability he saw in her gaze, a vulnerability that he had never witnessed before, a vulnerability that made him want to protect her. To shield her from the harsh realities of the world, to keep her safe from harm, always. He had never felt this way about anyone, and the realization both terrified and exhilarated him. Back at the Luo residence, Luo Lao was slowly recovering, his strength returning day by day. He was deeply grateful for Luo Qingtong's intervention, both in saving his life and in restoring order to the family. He was proud of the strong, capable woman she had become, a far cry from the frail, sickly girl he had once known. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she would lead the Luo family to greatness. Bai Lian, defeated and humiliated, seethed in her own courtyard, her heart filled with bitterness and resentment. She cursed Luo Qingtong, blaming her for all her misfortunes. She swore she would have her revenge, that she would make Luo Qingtong pay for everything she had done. She just needed to find the right opportunity, the right moment to strike. News of Ziyi Guitong's remarkable skills had spread throughout the Qianyu Empire, reaching even the farthest corners of the land. His reputation as a brilliant physician and a formidable formation master was now legendary. Even the emperor, despite his suspicions and his anger, couldn't deny the young man's talent. He was a valuable asset, one that he couldn't afford to lose. Luo Qingtong, oblivious to the whispers and rumors that swirled around her, focused on her own plans, her own agenda. She knew the Qianyu royal family was not to be trusted, and she was determined to uncover their secrets, to expose their treachery, and to bring them to justice. She just needed to be patient, to wait for the right moment to strike. As she continued to treat Xiao Qianming, monitoring his recovery with meticulous care, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move. She glanced around the room, her gaze sharp and alert, but she saw nothing out of the ordinary. "It's just your nerves," she muttered to herself, dismissing the unsettling feeling. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was being watched. She could feel it. Yi Qianming, his gaze still fixed on Luo Qingtong, felt a surge of possessiveness wash over him, a fierce, primal urge to protect her, to claim her as his own. He had never experienced such an intense emotion before, and it both thrilled and terrified him. He wanted her. He wanted her with a fierceness that bordered on obsession. But he knew he couldn't have her. Not yet. Not while so many dangers lurked in the shadows, threatening to tear them apart. He clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He had to be patient. He had to bide his time. He would have her. He would make her his. He just needed to find the right moment. The right opportunity. Xiaozu, sensing the intensity of his master's emotions, the raw, untamed possessiveness radiating from his very core, shifted nervously from foot to foot. He wanted to warn Luo Qingtong, to tell her to be careful, to stay away from Ming Zun, but he didn't dare. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that belied his diminutive form, that interfering in matters of the heart was a dangerous game, a game he couldn't afford to play. Luo Qingtong, oblivious to the turbulent emotions swirling around her, continued to tend to Xiao Qianming, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she monitored his progress. Her slender fingers probing his meridians, her healing energy flowing into him, mending his broken body, and soothing his troubled soul. As she worked, the unsettling feeling of being watched returned, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck that made her skin crawl. She glanced around the room, her gaze sharp and alert, but she saw nothing out of the ordinary. The room was empty, save for herself, Xiao Qianming, and Xiaozu. "It's nothing," she muttered to herself, dismissing the feeling as mere paranoia. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move, observing her every action. Yi Qianming, his gaze never leaving her, felt a fierce surge of protectiveness wash over him, a primal urge to shield her, to keep her safe from harm, from the prying eyes of the world, from the treacherous machinations of the Qianyu royal family, and from the dark secrets that threatened to consume them all. He wanted her. He wanted her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. A burning need that consumed his every thought, his every breath. But he knew he couldn't have her. Not yet. Not while so many dangers lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. Waiting to tear them apart. He clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides, the dragonstone ring on his finger digging into his flesh, a tangible reminder of the power he wielded. The power he would use to protect her, to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Xiaozu, sensing the turbulent emotions radiating from his master, the raw, untamed possessiveness that seemed to crackle in the air around him, shifted nervously from foot to foot, his small form trembling slightly. He wanted to warn Luo Qingtong, to tell her to be wary of Ming Zun, to keep her distance, but he didn't dare. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that belied his diminutive form, that interfering in matters of the heart, especially those of his volatile master, was a dangerous game, one he couldn't afford to play. Luo Qingtong, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrents swirling around her, remained focused on Xiao Qianming, her brow furrowed with concern as she monitored his slow but steady recovery. Her slender fingers, glowing faintly with healing energy, traced the paths of his meridians, mending his broken body and soothing his fractured soul. As she worked, the unsettling feeling of being watched returned, a prickling sensation at the nape of her neck that made her skin crawl. She glanced around the room. Her gaze sharp and alert, but saw nothing amiss. The room was empty save for herself, Xiao Qianming, and the nervously fidgeting Xiao Zhu. Yi Qianming, his gaze still fixed on Luo Qingtong, felt a possessive urge surge within him, a primal instinct to protect her, to shield her from the world, to claim her as his own. The realization of the depth of his feelings, the sheer intensity of his desire, both thrilled and terrified him. He had never felt this way about anyone before. And the unfamiliarity of the emotion was unsettling. Xiao Zhu, sensing the turbulent emotions radiating from his master, shifted nervously, his small form practically vibrating with anxiety. He wanted to warn Luo Qingtong. To tell her to be wary of Mingzun, to keep her distance, but the words caught in his throat. He knew, with an ancient wisdom that belied his diminutive form, that interfering in matters of the heart, especially those of his volatile master, was a dangerous game, a game he couldn't afford to play. Luo Qingtong, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrents swirling around her, remained focused on Xiao Qianming, her brow furrowed with concern as she continued to monitor his recovery. Her slender fingers, glowing faintly with healing energy, traced the paths of his meridians, mending his broken body and soothing his fractured soul. The unsettling sensation of being watched intensified, a prickling at the nape of her neck that made her skin crawl. She glanced around the room, her gaze sharp and alert, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The room was empty save for herself, Xiao Qianming, and the increasingly anxious Xiao Zhu. "It's just your nerves," she muttered to herself, trying to dismiss the feeling. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move, observing her every action. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something unpleasant. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the air, followed by a series of muffled thuds. Luo Qingtong's head snapped up, her eyes widening in alarm. The wards surrounding the academy, they were collapsing. Xiao Qianming, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden surge of malevolent energy that permeated the air, scrambled to his feet, ignoring the lingering ache in his newly healed wounds. "What was that?" he asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Before Luo Qingtong could answer, a wave of tremors shook the building, rattling the windows and sending dust raining down from the ceiling. "They are here," Luo Qingtong said grimly, her eyes narrowing. "The Zhizun assassins." Xiao Qianming's blood ran cold. They had found her. He grabbed her hand, his own trembling slightly. "We have to get out of here." But it was too late. The door to their room burst open, splintering into pieces, and a group of assassins, clad in black from head to toe, their faces concealed by masks, poured into the room. Their swords were drawn, their eyes cold and merciless, their movements swift and deadly. Xiao Zhu, seeing the imminent danger, didn't hesitate. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the building, he transformed into his true form, a massive, hulking beast that dwarfed the assassins. His powerful aura radiated outwards, pushing back the intruders and giving Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming precious seconds to react. "Run!" he bellowed, his voice a thunderous roar. "I'll hold them off." Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming didn't hesitate. They turned and fled, Xiao Zhu's massive form a shield between them and the assassins, buying them the time they desperately needed. As they ran, they could hear Xiao Zhu's furious roars echoing behind them, punctuated by the clash of steel, the screams of dying men, and the sickening crunch of bone. Luo Qingtong, as they fled through the labyrinthine corridors of the academy, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. The assassins, though skilled and deadly, hadn't been trying to kill them. They had been trying to capture them. Or, more specifically, they had been trying to capture her. She glanced back at Xiao Qianming, his small form struggling to keep up with her pace, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was still weak from his recent injuries, and the exertion was clearly taking its toll. "They are not trying to kill us," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They are trying to capture me." Xiao Qianming's eyes widened in surprise. Capture you? But why? Luo Qingtong's brow furrowed in thought. I don't know. But I have a feeling it has something to do with the emperor. She had made a powerful enemy in the Qianyu emperor, and she knew he wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. He wanted information on Ming Zun. And he clearly believed that she possessed that information. He's using the Jizun assassins to capture me, she continued, her voice grim. He wants to interrogate me, to force me to reveal Ming Zun's secrets. Xiao Qianming's grip on her hand tightened. We won't let him, he said fiercely, his eyes blazing with determination. We'll find a way out of this. I promise. Luo Qingtong smiled, a small, grateful smile that warmed her eyes. I know we will, she replied, her voice filled with confidence. She had faced far worse odds in her past life. And she had always prevailed. She wouldn't let the emperor, or his assassins, break her. As they continued to run, the sounds of the battle behind them grew fainter, until they were enveloped in an almost eerie silence. They had managed to lose their pursuers. At least for the moment. We need to find somewhere safe to hide, Luo Qingtong said, her eyes scanning their surroundings. Somewhere they won't find us. Xiao Qianming nodded, his gaze following hers. They were deep within the academy grounds, surrounded by towering buildings and winding corridors. It wouldn't be easy to find a place to hide. Not with Jizun assassins lurking around every corner. Suddenly, Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up. There! She exclaimed, pointing towards a small, unassuming building hidden amongst the trees. The old library. No one ever goes there. They quickly made their way towards the library, their hearts pounding in their chests, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They could only hope that they hadn't been seen. That they could reach the library before the assassins caught up with them. They slipped through the library's heavy wooden doors, the hinges groaning in protest as they closed behind them, plunging them into darkness. Luo Qingtong quickly lit a candle. The flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows across the dusty shelves and towering stacks of ancient tomes. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and decaying parchment, a comforting aroma that Luo Qingtong found strangely soothing. This place, forgotten and neglected by most of the academy, was a sanctuary, a haven from the chaos and danger that swirled outside its walls. We should be safe here, for now, she said, her voice low, her eyes scanning the dimly lit chamber. No one ever comes here. Xiao Qianming nodded, his gaze following hers, his small form still trembling slightly from their frantic escape. What do we do now? He asked, his voice laced with anxiety. We can't stay here forever. Luo Qingtong's brow furrowed in thought. I know. We need to find a way to get out of the academy. And we need to do it quickly. She knew the Jizun assassins wouldn't give up so easily. They would be searching for her, scouring every corner of the academy until they found her. And if they did, she shuddered, pushing the thought away. She wouldn't let them capture her. She wouldn't let the emperor get his hands on her. She wouldn't let him force her to reveal Ming Zun's secrets. There might be a secret passage out of the academy, Xiao Qianming suggested, his eyes scanning the shelves, searching for any clues, any hints that might lead them to freedom. I've heard rumors. Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up. A secret passage. That's actually a possibility. The academy was ancient, its history shrouded in mystery and legend. It wouldn't be surprising if there were hidden tunnels and secret passages woven into its very foundations. We need to find a map, she said, her voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. A map of the academy. There has to be one somewhere in this library. With a smug look, the 8-character mustache claimed, it was this subordinate, who stumbled upon an ancient competition ground and refined it there. Ming Zun's expression turned icy. He questioned sharply, who gave you the formula? These words stunned the 8-character mustache. Ming Zun's gaze grew colder. Where did you get it? You couldn't possibly formulate such a high-level medicinal liquid. The 8-character mustache realized the situation was dire. Just as he was about to speak, his palm emitted a black mist. The 8-character mustache cried out in pain. It was that black-robed man. It was him. I was wrong. I'll go find him now. Could that black-robed man be related to that woman? Ming Zun watched intently. Bei Qing, you dispatch some men to follow Tang. Also, summon the auction house's head manager. Here. Feng Yu was puzzled. Why was Master acting this way? Ming Zun tossed the medicinal liquid to him. The moment Feng Yu opened it, his eyes widened. This is the same as Master's healing medicinal liquid. The composition is identical, although the formula has been slightly improved. If that woman has seen or used it, it's not entirely impossible. Feng Yu thought to himself, if it's that woman, this subordinate will definitely find her. Inside the bloody arena, a sea of people roared. Qingtong's figure caught the attention of a courtesan. Xiaozu couldn't understand why the woman had come here. Qingtong, however, had a mysterious air about him. The courtesan leaned against Qingtong. Gentlemen, looking for a room, or something else? Qingtong firmly gripped her hand. I don't like being touched. Understand. The courtesan, pained, pleaded. Please, let go. The courtesan turned to whisper to Qingtong. Don't like women. Do you prefer? At that moment, on the arena stage, a burly man was being pummeled by a skinny man. Blows landed squarely, beating the burly man. Without a chance to retaliate, Qingtong pointed at the burly man. I'll buy him 4 gold. These words stunned the courtesan. Qingtong saw the courtesan's hesitation. You only need to introduce him to me. I'll buy him. Just as the skinny man raised his hands in celebration of victory, Qingtong walked to the burly man. Do you want to live? The man looked at Qingtong with bloody eyes, smiling sinisterly. Qingtong circulated his power, thinking to himself, want me to save you? I'll save you. Surrender to me, and I will. The burly man suddenly straightened up, surging power coursing through his body. A roar erupted from his throat as he lunged at the skinny man, instantly pinning him to the ground. The skinny man instantly turned into a pool of blood. He roared furiously, his madness intensifying, his entire body emitting a terrifying aura. He collapsed to the ground. Luo Qingtong looked at the courtesan. Have your manager prepare the money. The courtesan explained, he has to be alive to win. Now, it's a draw. Qingtong sneered. Who says he's dead? He entered the arena. He poured a green liquid into the man's mouth, and massaged his body for a while. The man swayed unsteadily, standing up. The crowd wondered what the black-robed person had given him. He looked at the stunned referee. Now you can declare him the winner. As the referee brought down the gavel, the crowd erupted in cheers. How may I address you? Regardless of the price, I must have your medicinal liquid. A triumphant smirk spread across Qingtong's lips. Call me Ziyi Gui Tong. This was her past life's title, a final memento. Let everyone know the name of Ziyi Gui Tong. Who would have thought that the 5th prince of the Qianyu Empire would kneel before a woman, begging for mercy? Inside the VIP room of Zishan Arena, 2 managers looked at Qingtong with a mixture of smiles and apprehension. Their faces were full of flattery. Master Ziyi, how many more bottles of that medicinal liquid do you have? Before they could finish, Qingtong interrupted. The proceeds will be split evenly between you and the arena. You can use the liquid for meridian refinement. The profits will be split. Future collaborations will follow the same method. What do you say? His words stunned the arena managers. You need to find a way to procure these medicinal herbs for me. If you need anything in the future, you can come to find me. He handed them the list. The man had just taken the list when a voice rang out. Who is Ziyi Gui Tong? The managers were annoyed. Having finally established a connection with Ziyi, who was this clueless soul, Yu Wenmo pushed his way through. He flashed a black jade token. This is your token, understand? Yu Wenmo asked loudly, are you Ziyi Gui Tong? Quickly, come with me and save my junior sister. She's seriously injured. Qingtong remained unmoved. Yu Wenmo pulled out a large sum of money. As long as Ziyi saves her, we will handsomely reward you. Qingtong tapped his finger, a sinister smile playing on his lips. I have 3 principles. I don't save the doomed. I don't save those beyond my abilities. And lastly, I don't save those who displease me. Your request fails on the 3rd point. Find someone else. These words enraged Yu Wenmo. Brother, don't waste your breath on this kind of person. Let's hurry and find Master Liu. Just as Yu Wenmo was about to leave, the 8-character mustache rushed in like a ghost. Master, have mercy. I know I was wrong. It was all my fault. I beg Master to spare me. His head repeatedly banged against the ground. The Shengyuan disciples, having never seen such a scene, cursed Qingtong vehemently. Qingtong, ignoring them, looked at Master Liu. Tell me, why did you end up like this? The Sheng Yuan disciples gasped in shock. How could this man be Master Liu? The arena manager confirmed, seeing the badge on the man's chest. Indeed, he is Master Liu. Master Liu, in agony, pleaded, it's my fault. I shouldn't have tampered with your medicinal liquid. I beg for your forgiveness. The Sheng Yuan disciples took a step back, incredulous. It shouldn't be this severe, but the manager scolded them. Show some respect to Master Ziyi. You're all talk about morality, but if it were you, you might do even worse. Yu Wenmo also hesitated. Just as he was about to leave, Qingtong stopped him. Since the truth is out, you have two choices. Kneel, kowtow, and apologize 3 times, and he'll let you go. Or, Yu Wenmo, hearing this, burned with rage. The Sheng Yuan disciples also cursed Qingtong for being inhumane. Qingtong, with an amused expression, implied that there were no other options. The 2 arena managers called for their men. The manager smirked. This is Black Jade City. What kind of place do you think this is? Do you think mercy exists here? Yu Wenmo, who was just moments ago arrogant and domineering, now turned pale. He prostrated himself, hands clasped together, pleading. It was I who was blind and failed to recognize your greatness. Please, Master Ziyi. He could feel her presence, faint but distinct, a beacon in the darkness, drawing him closer, pulling him towards her with an irresistible force. He just hoped he wasn't too late. Back in the library, Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming had finally found what they were looking for. A hidden compartment concealed behind one of the bookshelves, containing a rolled-up parchment map. As Luo Qingtong unfurled the map, her eyes scanned the intricate details, her brow furrowing in concentration. There, she said, her finger tracing a thin, barely visible line that snaked beneath. The academy grounds. A secret tunnel. It leads outside the city walls. Xiao Qianming leaned closer, his gaze following her finger, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Can we make it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Luo Qingtong met his gaze, her eyes shining with determination. We have to, she replied, her voice firm. It's our only chance. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the hallway outside, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps and the unmistakable clang of steel. The Jizun assassins had found them. He slammed his fist against the table, the force of the blow shattering the polished wood. They dared to attack her within the academy walls. They dared to take her from me. His voice was low and dangerous, laced with a barely controlled fury that made Feng Yu and Bei Qing tremble. He turned to them, his eyes blazing with cold fire. Find her, he commanded, his voice a guttural growl. Find her. And bring her back to me. Unharmed. Is that clear? Feng Yu and Bei Qing, their faces pale with fear, quickly bowed their heads in submission. Yes, master. They turned and hurried away, eager to escape his wrath and carry out his orders before he could unleash the full force of his fury upon them. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that if they failed the consequences would be dire. Yi Qianming's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening with resolve. He wouldn't let anyone use her, manipulate her, or harm her. Not while he still drew breath. Xiaozu, seeing the dangerous glint in his master's eyes, swallowed hard, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He knew, with an ancient, instinctive certainty, that a storm was brewing, a storm that threatened to engulf them all. Luo Qingtong, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she finished applying the last bandage to Xiao Qianming's wounds, sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden change in the air that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She glanced up, her gaze sweeping across the room, but she saw nothing amiss. What is it? She asked, her voice soft, her eyes questioning. Xiao Qianming, sensing her unease, reached out and took her hand, his touch a silent reassurance. Nothing, he replied, his voice equally soft, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. It's nothing. You're just tired. Luo Qingtong smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Perhaps you're right, she murmured, squeezing his hand gently before pulling away. I should probably get some rest. She stood up and stretched, her body aching with exhaustion. She had pushed herself to her limits, both physically and mentally, and she desperately needed sleep. But as she turned to leave, a sudden commotion erupted from outside, shattering the peaceful quiet of the room. Shouts and screams echoed through the air, followed by the distinctive clash of steel against steel. Luo Qingtong's eyes narrowed, her body tensing instinctively. "What's going on?" she muttered, her voice laced with a hint of apprehension. Xiao Qianming, his own unease mirroring hers, scrambled to his feet, ignoring the lingering ache in his newly healed wounds. "I don't know," he replied, his voice tight with worry. "But it doesn't sound good." They rushed to the window, peering out into the courtyard below. The scene that greeted them made their blood run cold. The courtyard was swarming with assassins, clad in black, their faces masked, their movements swift and deadly. They were engaged in a fierce battle with the academy guards. Their swords flashing in the moonlight, their spiritual energy crackling in the air. "Jizun," Luo Qingtong breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that they had come for her. Xiao Qianming's eyes widened in alarm. "We have to get out of here," he exclaimed, grabbing her hand and pulling her towards the door. But it was too late. The door burst open, and a group of assassins poured into the room, their swords drawn, their eyes fixed on Luo Qingtong. Xiaozu, seeing the imminent danger, transformed into his true form, a massive, hulking beast that towered over the assassins. He roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the building. His powerful aura radiating outwards, pushing back the assassins, and giving Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming a precious few seconds to react. "Run!" he bellowed, his voice a thunderous roar. "I'll hold them off." Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming didn't hesitate. They turned and fled, Xiaozu's powerful form a shield between them and the assassins, buying them time, precious time that they desperately needed. As they ran, they could hear Xiaozu's furious roars echoing behind them, punctuated by the clash of steel and the screams of dying men. A messenger, his face pale and etched with worry, burst into Yi Qianming's room, interrupting his contemplation. "Master Ming Zun. It's terrible. The emperor has been poisoned." Again, Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively going to the sword at his hip. "What kind of poison?" he demanded, his voice sharp and laced with a dangerous edge. The messenger's face paled. I don't know, Master Ming Zun. The imperial physicians are baffled. They've never seen anything like it." Yi Qianming cursed under his breath, his heart pounding with a sudden, inexplicable fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow connected to Luo Qingtong, that she was in danger. "Prepare the Lingju," he commanded, his voice cold and hard. "We're going to the palace." The messenger bowed low and hurried away to carry out his orders. Yi Qianming turned to Feng Yu and Bei Qing, his gaze piercing. "I want you to find Ziyi Guitong," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Find him, and bring him to me. Alive. Do you understand?" Feng Yu and Bei Qing exchanged uneasy glances. They had been searching for Ziyi Guitong for days, without any success. The man was like a ghost, his movements untraceable. His whereabouts a complete mystery. But Master Feng Yu began hesitantly, "We haven't been able to find any trace of him. Has vanished without a trace." Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Find him," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "I don't care how you do it. Just find him. Here's the key to all of this." "I know it." Feng Yu and Bei Qing, sensing the dangerous undercurrent in their master's voice, didn't dare argue. They bowed low and hurried away, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that if they failed to carry out their master's orders, the consequences would be dire. Feng Yu and Bei Qing hurried away, their minds racing, desperately trying to come up with a plan to find the elusive Ziyi Guitong. They had searched high and low, leaving no stone unturned, but the man was like a ghost, his movements untraceable, his whereabouts a complete mystery. They were starting to fear that they would never find him. That they would fail their master and face his wrath. Meanwhile, Yi Qianming arrived at the palace, his Lingju descending gracefully onto the landing platform. He strode through the opulent corridors, his expression grim. His eyes narrowed, his every sense on high alert. He could feel the oppressive weight of the emperor's presence, the suffocating aura of fear and desperation that clung to the palace like a shroud. He reached the emperor's bedchamber, the scene that greeted him a stark contrast to the lavish surroundings. The emperor lay upon his ornate bed, his face pale and drawn. His body racked with tremors, his breathing shallow and labored. Physicians hovered around him, their faces etched with worry and fear, their efforts to alleviate his suffering proving futile. Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, his gaze sweeping over the assembled courtiers and physicians, his senses probing the air, searching for any trace of the poison that had felled the emperor. He could sense the remnants of a potent toxin, something rare and insidious, something familiar. He approached the bedside, his gaze fixed on the emperor's ashen face. "What poison is it?" he demanded, his voice cold and hard, brooking no argument. The head physician, his face pale with fear, stepped forward, his voice trembling. We don't know, Master Mingzun. We've never encountered anything like it. It's unlike any poison we've ever seen." Yi Qianming's jaw tightened, his suspicion growing. This was no ordinary poison. This was something deliberate. Something targeted. He turned to the emperor, his voice low and dangerous. "Who did this?" The emperor, his eyes flickering open, his gaze meeting Yi Qianming's, a flicker of fear crossing his face before being quickly masked by a look of haughty indifference. "I don't know," he rasped, his voice weak and strained. "It was an assassin. They attacked me in my sleep." Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed, his gaze boring into the emperor's, searching for any sign of deception. He could sense the fear lurking beneath the surface, the desperation clinging to him like a shroud. But he couldn't be certain if he was telling the truth. The emperor was a master manipulator, a skilled liar. He could be feigning weakness, playing the victim to gain sympathy and deflect suspicion. "An assassin," Yi Qianming repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. "And you have no idea who sent them?" The emperor shook his head weakly. "No. I have no idea. It was a cowardly attack. They struck from the shadows, and then they vanished." Yi Qianming didn't believe him. He could sense the flicker of deceit in the emperor's eyes, the subtle shift in his demeanor that betrayed his lie. But he couldn't prove it. "Not yet. If you're lying to me," he began, his voice low and menacing, his eyes narrowing dangerously. The emperor interrupted him, his voice weak, but laced with a hint of defiance. "I swear on my life, Mingzun. I have no idea who poisoned me. I only know that I sent for Ziyi Guitong to treat my affliction, but he never arrived." Yi Qianming's jaw tightened, his suspicion hardening into certainty. The emperor was lying. And Luo Qingtong's disappearance was somehow connected to his sudden illness. He could feel it in his gut. He turned to the head physician, his gaze sharp and piercing. "Is there any trace of the poison? Anything that might give us a clue as to its origin?" The physician, his face pale and drawn, shook his head. "I'm afraid not, Master Mingzun. The poison is unlike anything I've ever encountered. It's as if it was designed to be untraceable." Yi Qianming's frustration mounted. He needed to find Luo Qingtong. He needed to know she was safe. He suddenly realized just how much he needed her. A realization that both surprised and unsettled him. He turned to leave, his mind already racing, formulating a plan to find her, to uncover the truth behind the emperor's poisoning and her disappearance. He would find her. He had to. As he strode out of the bedchamber, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled courtiers, his voice ringing out, cold and clear. "If anyone knows anything about Ziyi Guitong's whereabouts, or about the poison that has afflicted His Majesty, I urge you to come forward. Now, your silence will not be tolerated. And your complicity will be punished severely." A heavy silence blanketed the room, the assembled courtiers and physicians exchanging uneasy glances, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and apprehension. No one dared to speak, to break the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a suffocating shroud. They knew the price of crossing Mingzun, of incurring his wrath. They had witnessed his power firsthand, the raw, untamed force of his spiritual energy, and they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that defying him would be akin to courting death. Yi Qianming's gaze swept over them, his eyes cold and merciless, his expression unwavering. He could sense their fear, their apprehension, their carefully concealed secrets. He knew that someone in this room knew something that could help him find Luo Qingtong, something that could shed light on the mystery surrounding the empress poisoning. He waited, his patience wearing thin, the silence stretching on, broken only by the shallow, labored breaths of the poisoned emperor. Finally, a young courtier, his face pale and drawn, his body trembling almost imperceptibly, stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. Master Ming Zun, I may have heard something. Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking onto the young man, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Speak. The courtier swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, his voice trembling even more violently now. I overheard some of the guards talking. They said that they saw Master Z. Yi leaving the palace earlier today, with a young boy. Yi Qianming's heart skipped a beat. A young boy. Could it be Xiao Qianming? A sinking feeling settled in his gut. A premonition of something unpleasant, something wrong. Did they say where they were going? He asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed urgency. The courtier shook his head, his face a mask of fear. No, Master Ming Zun. They didn't say. They just mentioned seeing them leaving the palace. That's all I know. Yi Qianming cursed under his breath, his frustration mounting. He needed to find Luo Qingtong. He needed to know she was safe. And he needed to find out what she was doing with Xiao Qianming. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach, a cold, unwelcome sensation that he couldn't ignore. He turned to Feng Yu and Bei Qing, his voice sharp and commanding, brooking no argument. Find them, he ordered. Find Luo Qingtong and the boy. I want to know where they are. And I want to know it now. Feng Yu and Bei Qing bowed low, their faces grim. Yes, master. They turned and hurried away, their minds already racing, formulating a plan to track down Luo Qingtong and the mysterious young boy she had been seen with. Meanwhile, Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming, having successfully evaded the Jizun assassins, were now deep within the labyrinthine network of tunnels that snaked beneath the academy grounds. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the musty scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the oppressive silence broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water, and the soft padding of their footsteps. Xiao Qianming, still weak from his recent injuries, stumbled slightly, his small form faltering in the dim light of the flickering tallow candle Luo Qingtong held aloft. Luo Qingtong's hand instinctively shot out, grasping his arm, preventing him from falling. Are you all right? She asked, her voice soft with concern, her gaze searching his face in the dim light. Xiao Qianming nodded, his cheeks flushing slightly at her touch, her concern. I'm fine, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Just a little tired. Luo Qingtong's brow furrowed with worry. She knew he was pushing himself too hard, his body still weakened from the injuries he had sustained protecting her. But she also knew they couldn't afford to stop, not while the Jizun assassins were still hunting them, their every step dogged by danger. We need to keep moving, she said gently, her hand still resting lightly on his arm, offering silent support and encouragement. We're almost there. Xiao Qianming nodded again, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, his determination fueled by her words, her touch, the unwavering strength of her spirit. He wouldn't let her down. He would protect her, even if it was the last thing he did. As they continued their journey through the dimly lit tunnels, Xiao Qianming couldn't shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important. A nagging feeling tugged at the edges of his memory, a half-formed thought that seemed just beyond his grasp. He glanced at Luo Qingtong, her profile illuminated by the flickering candlelight, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. He studied her face, the sharp angles of her jaw, the curve of her neck, the determined set of her mouth. She was beautiful. Strong. Resourceful. Everything he was not. A pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, pierced his heart. He wanted to be stronger, more capable, more worthy of her. He wanted to be able to protect her. To shield her from the dangers of the world, to be her strength, her shield, her protector. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He would become stronger. He would become the man she deserved. He had to. Luo Qingtong, sensing his gaze, turned to look at him, her eyes questioning. What is it? She asked, her voice soft. Xiao Qianming's cheeks flushed slightly, embarrassed by the intensity of his emotions. Nothing, he mumbled, quickly averting his gaze. It's nothing. Just thinking. Luo Qingtong studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of suspicion flickering in their depths. She could sense that he was hiding something. But she decided not to press him. Not now. They had more pressing matters to attend to. We're almost there, she said, her voice a low murmur, her gaze returning to the path ahead. Just a little further. Xiao Qianming, still weak from his injuries, stumbled slightly, his small form faltering in the dim light of the flickering tallow candle Luo Qingtong held. Luo Qingtong's hand shot out instinctively, grasping his arm, preventing him from falling. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft with concern, her gaze searching his face in the dim light. Xiao Qianming nodded, his cheeks flushing slightly at her touch, her concern. "I'm fine," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Just a little tired." Luo Qingtong's brow furrowed with worry. She knew he was pushing himself too hard, his body still weakened from the injuries he had sustained protecting her. But she also knew they couldn't afford to stop, not while the Jizun assassins were still hunting them, their every step dogged by danger. "We need to keep moving," she said gently, her hand still resting lightly on his arm, offering silent support and encouragement. "We're almost there." Xiao Qianming nodded again, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, his determination fueled by her words, her touch, the unwavering strength of her spirit. He wouldn't let her down. He would protect her, even if it was the last thing he did. As they continued their journey through the dimly lit tunnels, a comfortable silence settled between them, the only sounds the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water, and the soft padding of their footsteps. Xiao Qianming, however, couldn't shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important, something familiar. A nagging sensation tugged at the edges of his memory, a half-formed thought that seemed just beyond his grasp, a whisper of a memory that refused to fully materialize. He glanced at Luo Qingtong, her profile illuminated by the flickering candlelight, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. He studied her face, the sharp angles of her jaw, the elegant curve of her neck, the determined set of her mouth. She was beautiful. Strong. Resourceful. Everything he was not. A pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, pierced his heart, a yearning for something he couldn't quite name, a desire to be more, to be better, to be worthy of her. He wanted to be stronger, more capable, more deserving of her attention, her respect, her affection. He wanted to be able to protect her, to shield her from the dangers of the world, to be her strength, her shield, her protector. He wanted to be her everything. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He would become stronger. He would become the man she deserved. He had to. Luo Qingtong, sensing his gaze, turned to look at him, her eyes questioning. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft, a gentle murmur in the stillness of the tunnel. Xiao Qianming's cheeks flushed slightly, embarrassed by the intensity of his emotions, the sudden surge of longing that had caught him off guard. "Nothing," he mumbled, quickly averting his gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's nothing. Just thinking." Luo Qingtong studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. She could sense that he was hiding something, that something was troubling him. But she decided not to press him. Not now. They had more pressing matters to attend to, more immediate dangers to face. "We're almost there," she said, her voice low and reassuring, her gaze returning to the path ahead. "Just a little further." "We're almost there," she repeated, her voice a low murmur, her gaze fixed on the path ahead, her mind already mapping out their next move, their escape route. "Just a little further." Xiao Qianming nodded, his gaze following hers, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He trusted her. He trusted her implicitly. He would follow her anywhere. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, a faint light flickered in the distance, a small, flickering flame that grew steadily brighter as they approached. "We're here," Luo Qingtong said, her voice a soft whisper, a hint of relief in her tone. They emerged from the tunnel into a small, hidden chamber, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay, the walls lined with ancient, crumbling bookshelves. It was the old library, a forgotten corner of the academy, a place where time seemed to stand still. Xiao Qianming frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "I've heard stories about secret passages beneath the academy," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Hidden tunnels used by the founders to escape during times of war." "Perhaps." Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. "A secret passage. That's actually a possibility. The academy is ancient. It wouldn't be surprising if there were hidden tunnels and secret chambers beneath the grounds." Xiaozu, who had been huddled in a corner, shivering with fear, perked up at the mention of a secret passage, his ears twitching, his small form practically vibrating with excitement. "A secret escape route. That's brilliant, Master. Let's find it. Let's get out of here." Luo Qingtong, ignoring Xiaozu's outburst, turned to Xiao Qianming, her gaze intent. "Do you know where we might find information about these passages?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. Xiao Qianming's brow furrowed again, his mind racing, sifting through his memories, searching for any clues, any hints that might lead them to freedom. There might be records in the old library. He said slowly, his voice thoughtful. It's not used much anymore. Most of the books and scrolls have been moved to the new library, but there might be something there. Something they overlooked. Luo Qingtong nodded, her mind already formulating a plan, her eyes scanning the dusty chamber, assessing their surroundings. The old library that could work. It's out of the way, secluded, the perfect place to hide while we search for a way out. Xiaozu, his fear momentarily forgotten in the excitement of a potential escape route, jumped up and down, clapping his hands gleefully. The old library. Brilliant. Let's go, Master. What are we waiting for? Luo Qingtong, a small smile playing on her lips, couldn't help but feel a surge of affection for the excitable little pig. Despite his fear and his often annoying antics, he was fiercely loyal, and she knew, deep down, that she could always count on him. All right, calm down, Xiaozu, she said, her voice gentle, a hint of amusement in her tone. We'll go to the old library. But we need to be careful. The Jizun assassins are still out there. And they won't hesitate to kill us if they find us. Xiaozu's excitement instantly evaporated, replaced by a familiar wave of terror. He nodded vigorously, his small form trembling. Yes, Master. Careful. Very careful. Xiao Qianming, his small form radiating an almost palpable aura of anxiety, glanced nervously at Luo Qingtong, his heart pounding in his chest. Are you sure about this? He whispered, his voice barely audible above the thump-thump-thump of his own heart. The old library, it's said to be haunted. Luo Qingtong chuckled, a playful glint in her eyes. Haunted? Don't be ridiculous. Ghosts and ghouls are nothing compared to Jizun assassins. Besides, she added with a mischievous grin, I'm far more terrifying than any ghost. Xiao Qianming's lips twitched in a reluctant smile. He couldn't deny the truth in her words. Luo Qingtong was indeed a force to be reckoned with, a formidable opponent even for the most hardened assassin. They continued their journey through the deserted, echoing corridors of the academy, their footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. The air grew heavy. The atmosphere thick with a palpable sense of foreboding as they neared their destination. Finally, they reached the old library, a towering, imposing structure that seemed to loom over them, its dark, silent windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, a silent, unsettling invitation into the unknown. Luo Qingtong pushed the doors open, the hinges groaning in protest as they swung inward, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with towering bookshelves that stretched towards the high vaulted ceiling, their surfaces laden with ancient, leather-bound tomes. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and decaying parchment, a comforting aroma that Luo Qingtong found strangely soothing, a familiar fragrance that evoked memories of her past life. Of countless hours spent poring over ancient texts in search of knowledge and power. Xiao Qianming, however, was not so easily reassured. He shivered, pulling his cloak tighter around him, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit chamber. Searching for any sign of the ghostly apparitions he had heard whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. See? Luo Qingtong said, her voice a low murmur, a gentle reassurance in the stillness of the ancient library. Nothing to be afraid of. Just books. Xiaozu, who had been unusually quiet during their journey through the tunnels, suddenly let out a squeal of pure, unadulterated excitement, his small form practically vibrating with joy. Books? Lots and lots of books. This is amazing. He scurried off, his little hooves clicking against the stone floor as he disappeared between the towering bookshelves. Eager to explore the library's hidden treasures, his fear momentarily forgotten in the thrill of discovery, Luo Qingtong smiled, shaking her head in amusement. Leave it to Xiaozu to find a reason to be excited even in the midst of danger, even in the heart of enemy territory. She turned to Xiao Qianming, her gaze serious, her voice low and urgent. We need to find a map, she said. A map of the academy grounds. There has to be one somewhere in here. Xiao Qianming nodded, his expression equally serious, his eyes scanning the vast chamber, taking in the sheer volume of books and scrolls, the daunting task that lay before them. Let's split up, he suggested. We'll cover more ground that way. Luo Qingtong agreed, and they began their search, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness of the ancient library, the only sounds in the oppressive silence. Xiao Qianming, as he carefully examined the dusty tomes, his fingers tracing the faded titles on their spines, couldn't shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important. A nagging sensation that tugged at the edges of his memory. He paused, his brow furrowing in concentration, as he tried to grasp the elusive thought, the half-formed memory that danced just beyond his reach. He glanced at a particular symbol etched into the cover of a worn, leather-bound book, a symbol that seemed strangely familiar. He stared at it, his mind racing, trying to place it, to connect it to something, anything, in his past. Suddenly, a jolt of recognition shot through him, a memory flashing through his mind, a memory of a young woman, her face veiled, her eyes shining with an otherworldly light. A woman who held a book bearing the same symbol. He remembered the stories, the whispers, the legends of the Luo family's lost daughter, the one who possessed a unique talent, a talent that had made her a target. A talent that had ultimately led to her demise. He remembered the rumors of her return, the whispers of her survival, the stories of her incredible power, her unparalleled skill in medicine and formations. He looked at the symbol again, his heart pounding in his chest, a sudden, terrifying realization dawning on him. Could it be? Could Luo Qingtong be the lost daughter of the Luo family? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought as absurd, as impossible. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it quickly took root, growing, twisting, wrapping itself around his heart, squeezing the breath from his lungs. He had to know the truth. He continued his search, his movements now frantic, his eyes scanning the shelves with a renewed urgency, searching for any clues, any evidence, that might confirm or deny his suspicions. He continued his search, his movements now frantic, his eyes scanning the shelves with a renewed urgency, searching for any clues, any evidence, that might confirm or deny his suspicions. He ran his fingers over the dusty spines of ancient tomes, his heart pounding in his chest, a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation coursing through his veins. He pulled a thick, leather-bound volume from the shelf, its pages brittle with age, its cover adorned with a complex, intricate symbol that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. He opened the book, his eyes scanning the faded script, his brow furrowing in concentration as he deciphered the ancient text. The book spoke of bloodlines, of ancient families, of unique talents passed down through generations, of hidden powers and forgotten legacies. It spoke of the Luo family, of their once great power, of their unique bloodline ability to manipulate the very essence of life and death. It spoke of a prophecy of a lost daughter, a daughter who would inherit the full power of the Luo family bloodline, a daughter who would either save the world or destroy it. Xiao Qianming's breath caught in his throat as he read the words, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind reeling from the implications. He looked at the symbol on the book cover again, then back at the words on the page, his gaze darting between the two, his mind struggling to connect the dots, to make sense of the information that was flooding his senses. He thought of Luo Qingtong, of her incredible skills in medicine and formations, of her mysterious past, of the strange, almost otherworldly aura that seemed to surround her, of the way she had saved his life, not once, but twice. He thought of the rumors he had heard, the whispers of the Luo family's lost daughter, the daughter who possessed a unique talent, a talent that had made her a target, a talent that had ultimately led to her supposed demise. He looked at the symbol on the book cover one last time, his heart now pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place, forming a clear, terrifying picture. Luo Qingtong, she was the lost daughter of the Luo family. He closed the book, his hands trembling, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had to tell her. He had to warn her. But what if she already knew? What if she had been hiding the truth from him all along? Xiao Qianming's brow furrowed, his mind racing. He had seen a similar symbol before somewhere, but where? Luo Qingtong smiled, her heart warming at his concern. Don't worry about me. I can handle myself. Xiao Qianming's brow furrowed. I know you can. But I still worry. He hesitated, then added softly, I don't want anything to happen to you. Luo Qingtong's cheeks flushed slightly at his words, her heart skipping a beat. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the dusty bookshelves, her voice a low murmur. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. That means a lot to me. Xiao Qianming's heart soared at her words. He wanted to say more, to tell her how he truly felt, but the words seemed to catch in his throat, blocked by a sudden shyness he couldn't explain. Just then, Xiao Zhu let out a squeal of excitement. Master! Look! I found something. Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming rushed to his side, their eyes widening in surprise as they saw what he held in his hands. A rolled-up parchment, yellowed with age but still remarkably intact. A map? Xiao Qianming asked, his voice laced with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Luo Qingtong carefully took the map from Xiao Zhu, her fingers tracing the faded lines and symbols. It looks like a map of the academy grounds, she said slowly, her brow furrowing in concentration. But it's different. There are markings here, hidden passages. Secret tunnels. Her eyes lit up with excitement. This could be our way out. He could feel her presence, faint but persistent, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, pulling him towards her with an irresistible force. He just hoped he wasn't too late. Back in the dusty confines of the old library, Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming had finally located what they were searching for. A hidden compartment concealed behind a crumbling bookshelf, containing a rolled-up parchment map, yellowed with age but still remarkably intact. As Luo Qingtong carefully unfurled the map, her eyes scanned the intricate details, her brow furrowing in concentration. There, she said, her finger tracing a thin, barely discernible line that snaked beneath the academy grounds, a secret path hidden from the world. A secret tunnel. It leads outside the city walls. Xiao Qianming leaned closer, his gaze following the path of her finger, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Can we make it? He whispered, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of his own heart. Luo Qingtong met his gaze, her eyes shining with unwavering determination. We have to, she replied, her voice firm and resolute. It's our only chance. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the hallway outside, followed by the sound of rapidly approaching footsteps and the unmistakable clang of steel against steel. The Jizun assassins had found them. Luo Qingtong's eyes narrowed, her body tensing instinctively. We have to go. Now, she grabbed Xiao Qianming's hand, pulling him towards the hidden entrance to the tunnel, a narrow, barely discernible opening concealed behind a large, dusty tapestry. As they slipped through the opening, the tapestry falling back into place behind them, plunging them into darkness, Luo Qingtong couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That unseen eyes were following their every move. She glanced back at Xiao Qianming, his small form trembling slightly in the darkness, his hand still clutched tightly in hers. Don't worry, she whispered, her voice a low, soothing murmur in the oppressive silence. We'll be all right. But even as she uttered the words, a chilling premonition settled over her, a cold knot of fear tightening in her gut. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That the real danger was yet to come. Yi Qianming arrived at the academy, his Lingju descending gracefully onto the training grounds, its arrival causing a ripple of excitement and curiosity amongst the students, who had gathered to watch. He ignored their stares, his mind focused solely on one thing. Finding Luo Qingtong. He stormed through the academy gates, his expression grim, his eyes narrowed, his senses probing the air, searching for any trace of her, any hint of her whereabouts. He could feel her presence, faint but distinct, a beacon in the growing darkness, drawing him closer, pulling him towards her with an irresistible force. He just prayed he wasn't too late. He found the scene of the battle, the courtyard littered with the bodies of fallen guards and assassins, the air thick with the coppery tang of blood and the lingering scent of spiritual energy. His eyes narrowed as he took in the carnage, his jaw tightening with barely controlled fury. Where is she? He demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that sent shivers down the spines of the surviving guards. They could only stammer and shake their heads, their faces pale with fear. They had failed to protect her. They had failed their master. Yi Qianming's fury exploded, his spiritual energy surging outwards in a destructive wave that shattered the remaining windows of the surrounding buildings, and sent debris raining down from the sky. He roared, his voice a primal scream of rage and frustration that echoed through the academy grounds, making the very earth tremble beneath his feet. He turned to Feng Yu and Bei Qing, who had just arrived, their faces grim, their bodies battered and bruised from their own battles. What did you find? He demanded, his voice laced with barely contained fury. The academy was attacked, Master, Feng Yu reported, his voice strained. By Jizun assassins. They were after Luo Qingtong. Yi Qianming's blood turned to ice. He had been right. She was in danger. And he was too late. Did you find her? He growled, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes blazing with a cold, deadly fire. Where is she? He demanded, his voice dangerously low, his eyes blazing with cold fury. Where is Luo Qingtong? The emperor, his face pale and drawn, his body weakened by the poison that still coursed through his veins, could only stare at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hatred. He knew Mingzun's wrath was a force to be reckoned with, a destructive power that could level mountains and shatter empires. And he knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had made a grave mistake in underestimating Zi Guitong, in underestimating the depth of Mingzun's feelings for her. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some excuse, some explanation, but the words caught in his throat, strangled by fear. Yi Qianming stepped closer, his shadow falling over the emperor, his aura radiating outwards, a palpable wave of power that pressed down on him, suffocating him, crushing him beneath its weight. I'll ask you one last time, Yi Qianming growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble that echoed through the chamber. Where is she? The emperor's resolve finally crumbled. He could no longer withstand the pressure, the sheer force of Mingzun's presence bearing down on him, threatening to shatter his very soul. I don't know, he stammered, his voice trembling. I swear. I sent for her to treat my poison, but she never arrived. Yi Qianming's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing the emperor's, searching for any hint of deception. He could sense the fear radiating from him, the desperation clinging to him like a shroud. But he couldn't be certain if he was telling the truth. He turned to Feng Yu and Bei Qing, who had just returned, their faces grim, their bodies battered and bruised. What did you find? The academy was attacked, Master, Feng Yu reported, his voice laced with urgency. By Jizun assassins. They were after Luo Qingtong. Yi Qianming's blood ran cold. He had been right. She was in danger. And he was too late. Did you find her? He demanded, his voice a low growl. Feng Yu shook his head, his expression grim. No, Master. She's gone. Vanished without a trace. Yi Qianming's fury exploded, his spiritual energy surging outwards in a destructive wave that shattered the windows of the chamber and sent the furniture flying. He roared, his voice a primal scream of rage and frustration that echoed through the palace, making the very foundations tremble. He turned to the cowering emperor, his eyes blazing with cold fire. You will find her, he commanded, his voice dripping with venom. You will find her, or I will personally destroy everything you hold dear. Everything. Do you understand? The emperor, trembling with fear, could only nod, his eyes wide with terror. He knew Mingzun's wrath was not to be trifled with. He would find Luo Qingtong. He had to. His life depended on it. Yi Qianming turned and stormed out of the palace, his heart a maelstrom of fear, anger, and a desperate, all-consuming need to find her, to hold her, to protect her from the darkness that threatened to engulf them both. He would find her. He had to. He couldn't live without her. He didn't know it then, but his search would lead him on a perilous journey, a journey that would test his strength, his courage, and the very depths of his love. As he soared through the skies on his Lingju, his gaze fixed on the horizon, he couldn't shake the image of her face, her smile, the warmth of her touch. He would find her. He had to. Meanwhile, Luo Qingtong and Xiao Qianming had made their way through the secret tunnel, emerging into the dense forest that surrounded the Qianyu capital. They were free. At least for now. But they knew their freedom was precarious, a fleeting moment of respite in a world that was determined to tear them apart. They paused at the edge of the forest, their eyes scanning their surroundings, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were alone, vulnerable, and hunted. They had escaped the academy, but the Jizun assassins were still out there, somewhere, waiting for them, hunting them. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that the emperor wouldn't give up so easily. He would find them. He had to. Qingtong curiously tilted her head. Why did the man's hand suddenly turn icy? From the corner of her eye, she saw a small needle stuck in the man's hand. Several people rushed to check on the man and inquired if he was all right. The man, however, simply ordered them to fetch the medicine. When they returned with the medicine, the man's face darkened, as it was useless. Qingtong commanded them to quickly fetch a doctor. The man, as if his butt was on fire, flew out of the water. He anxiously yelled, "Is anyone here? Save me!" The scene of a dignified sovereign thrashing about like a fish out of water was hilarious. The man could only grab onto Qingtong and beg, "Beauty, help." In Qingtong's shocked gaze, the man's head suddenly rested on her shoulder. He felt as if 5 or 6 axes were chopping at his body, a pain he had never experienced in this world. Chu Lao's face turned pale, recognizing that the man was highly esteemed. He immediately ordered the guards to bring some highly potent medicine for the man. The man, however, also said that he could only live if he sought help immediately. He anxiously begged Qingtong to treat him, with pleading eyes. He offered to pledge allegiance to her in exchange. Qingtong coldly replied that only if he made a vow to serve her loyally would she treat him. Hearing this, Chu Lao was furious. He stubbornly refused, saying that if she didn't agree, then she should prepare to be sliced into 1,000 pieces. Qingtong casually replied, "As you wish," then turned and left with the group. Faced with the threat of death, Chu Lao compromised. After all, anyone who could counteract Yin Kuei Lao Guai's energy manipulation wasn't weak. Late that night, Yin Kuei Lao Guai returned and found bodies scattered everywhere. His face darkened as he asked, "What happened?" The war slaves anxiously explained that these people had suddenly collapsed. He noticed that the energy threads weren't broken, and his expression grew puzzled. Just as he was about to investigate further, countless needles suddenly shot towards him. He staggered backward amidst the cries of pain, his feet stepping on the previously deactivated traps. Qingtong severed the countless threads connected to him, her rage building. The guards, resurrected from death, approached him. This allowed him to realize that the attacker was the esteemed, but his body was completely immobilized. He quickly cast a spell to summon the ironclad warriors, but they were blocked by a formation. Qingtong swiftly ordered attacks from different directions. The old man, enraged, unleashed countless attacks. Following Qingtong's commands, they easily passed through the areas where they were previously trapped. Yet, they themselves remained completely unaffected. Witnessing this scene, Yin Kuei Lao Guai was shocked. It turned out that Qingtong could not only break his threads, but also manipulate formations undetected. Without further worries, she attacked Yin Kuei Lao Guai. Their counterattacks landed squarely on them, knocking them to the ground, flat and motionless. It was then that they realized they had been played by Qingtong from the very beginning. Unable to control his anger due to his meridian issues, he unleashed his spiritual energy, immediately knocking everyone down. He now wished he could tear the woman before him to shreds. The war slave loudly reminded him, "Master, she's too powerful." However, Qingtong wanted to test if the Yin Han Muse would attribute could absorb power in this spirit-rich place. She looked at Yin Kuei Lao Guai flying towards her. Qingtong sneered, using spiritual power while seriously injured. "You're courting death." Her red pupils flickered. This was a truly ruthless person. Spiritual power surged into her sword, and the first move of the Zhan Qianju was unleashed. An immense force slammed into Yin Kuei Lao Guai's hand. The pain of his body being torn apart caused him to utter a final scream. The next day, several uninvited guests gathered at the Luo family's gate. The Luo family will be ruined by Luo Qingtong sooner or later. You should quickly pledge allegiance to Second Miss. The people who were once arrogant and dismissive, claiming Luo Qingtong was useless, were now groveling and begging for mercy. It turned out that after handling matters at Juwu Mountain, Qingtong had returned to the Luo residence. Merely by glancing, the man was instantly subdued by her tears. However, Qingtong poured the yixiang he had brought onto them, and ordered the war slaves to lock them up. "Go and tell Luo Shenning that I will collect the debt she owes me and the Luo family with interest." Back at the Luo residence, Luo Lao Yizi's face was ashen, devoid of any expression. Looking at the chaos in the house, he asked in a trembling voice, "What happened?" The people inside knelt in fear. The steward explained that Luo Lao Yizi's cultivation was continuously dissipating, and at this rate, he would soon become useless. These words deeply moved Qingtong. Touching Luo Lao Yizi's pale face, she understood his suffering. Luo Lao Yizi's cultivation had already dropped to the 6th level of Wuzong, and was continuing to decline. This made Qingtong furious. Who could have devised such a cruel and insidious method? The steward could only recount the entire incident. It turned out that Luo Shenning was behind it. After Luo Lao Yizi collapsed, she took control of the Luo family, claiming that the family was ruined by Qingtong. Qingtong, however, didn't believe it. Luo Shenning didn't have the guts or brains for this. It must have been orchestrated by the Qianyu imperial family. Luo Shenning was merely a pawn. Suddenly, Luo Lao Yizi stirred. When he saw Qingtong safe and sound, Luo Lao Yizi felt relieved. He blamed himself for using a risky tactic and falling into a coma, causing Qingtong to worry. Qingtong, seeing everything, reassured him, "Grandpa, don't worry. Everything will be all right." Luo Lao Yizi laughed heartily. "Losing some cultivation is nothing. As long as you're safe, it's not a big deal." Qingtong's eyes reddened. Luo Lao Yizi had done everything for her. Now, how could she protect him? She held her grandfather's hand. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I can support the Luo family. It'll also help you recover your strength, and you'll be stronger than before." Meanwhile, at Luo Qintong's residence, the Luo family plaque hung high above the gate. Inside, Bai Lian's family was celebrating. They had taken over the Luo family, and were now toasting to Qingtong's downfall. Suddenly, the sound of galloping horses interrupted the festivities. By the order of eldest Miss, we're here to arrest the second branch and confiscate their property. Bai Lian's mother was furious. The war slave raised the imperial decree, causing a wave of shock. Bai Lian was terrified. She never expected an ordinary guard to be a fifth-level woohoo. Why does Luo Qingtong have such powerful guards? The war slave, seeing their hesitation, stepped forward. Bai Lian and the others retreated in fear. Suddenly, Bai Lian's gaze shifted, and she pushed her father towards the war slave. In the ensuing chaos, the guards easily subdued Bai Lian's father. During the retreat, Bai Lian even threw the maidservants one by one at the guards. Clearly, he was prepared to sacrifice everything. Cries of shock and anger erupted from the Luo residence's entrance. The men were imprisoned in the dungeon, but one of them, called Lao begged to be released. It turned out that Lao was a loyal subordinate of Wang Xifeng. And behind him stood the Qianyu Emperor's faction. Qingtong also learned from the war slave that Bai Lian had fled to the Da Qinsheng Yuan Academy. When she arrived at the dungeon, she happened upon the man begging the guards. Qingtong scoffed, mocking him. "Your own father is being used as a shield, and you still expect him to save you." The man, however, thought differently. He believed all this was due to Ning's schemes. His eyes turned cold. He wouldn't let anyone who harmed his grandfather go, especially those pulling the strings behind the scenes. He also cursed the man, saying he was worse than an animal for using his own father as a pawn. Lao, unaware of the situation, still wanted to argue. Qingtong took out a pill from her pocket. The first war slave ordered Luo Lao to swallow it. He also released the decoy outside. Hearing this, Luo Lao panicked. After swallowing the pill, the man's strength increased dramatically. However, once this surge of power was used, it would backfire. If not used, he would become a beast. In despair, Luo Lao shouted, "Ning, I won't let you go." Qingtong paid him no mind, as the next target was Bai Lian. Late at night, Qingtong studied a book in her room. The war slave reported that Luo Qintong had returned to the Luo residence. There was now a Qianyu branch academy instructor accompanying her. Moreover, through some unknown means, the instructor was extremely devoted to Qingtong. Hearing this, Qingtong was intrigued and wanted to investigate. She instructed the war slave to make a list of all the gifts the imperial family and royal clans had given her over the years. She planned to give Bai Lian a gift in return. At that moment, Bai Lian was pacing anxiously in her room, convinced that Qingtong wouldn't let her go. Her father was missing, also because of Qingtong. Chu Laoma wasn't around, but if he dared to cause trouble, she would surely make him pay. Bai Lian put on a pitiful act, earning Chu Lao's sympathy. He believed she was too kind, and that was why Qingtong bullied her. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound startled them both. The Luo family plaque fell to the ground, broken. Qingtong, riding a tall horse, ordered the war slaves to smash the plaque to pieces. She slapped Bai Lian, whose face was covered in thick makeup, calling herself Luo. The war slaves smashed the plaque with relish. "People from the Luo residence, stop." This plaque was given to Miss by the Qianyu Branch Academy. Qingtong, however, didn't relent. Bai Lian appeared, putting on a dramatic performance. "Big sister, what are you doing?" The two stared at each other. The Luo residence plaque was the only thing left. "Since you've been expelled from the Luo family, is this plaque something you can still hang?" Qingtong immediately ordered her men to bring a new plaque. The two words Dao Fu on the plaque instantly angered Bai Lian. Filled with fear, she shouted, "You're my sister. How can you humiliate me like this? Don't you have a conscience?" Seeing Bai Lian's pretense, Qingtong became even angrier. Bai Lian tearfully complained, "Big sister, you're so heartless. You expelled me from the Luo family, and now you're still hounding me. Look what you've done to the Luo family. Grandpa's declining health is all your fault." Her acting skills were worthy of an Oscar. Not mentioning Luo Lao Yizi was fine, but mentioning him made Qingtong want to strangle her. The war slave stepped forward. "What have you done? Do you dare to tell the truth?" Bai Lian's face changed faster than flipping a book. Initially, she fiercely defended her actions and doted on her disciple, but in the next second, she was slapped hard. It turned out that Qingtong had not only exposed her misdeeds, but also presented evidence. Just now, when Bai Lian was questioned, she hid behind Chu Lao. He couldn't bear to see his beloved disciple being bullied. In Qingtong's eyes, Bai Lian became an arrogant and domineering bully, abusing the fifth prince's name and committing all sorts of evil deeds. Qingtong frowned. "Where did this dog come from? The Luo family's affairs have nothing to do with you." Qingtong's disrespectful words were twisted by Bai Lian and used to her advantage. She revealed that Chu Lao was an instructor from the Qianyu branch academy, inwardly mocking the old fool for being tricked by this two-faced little vixen into standing up for her. He must have been kicked in the head. Qingtong scoffed, not taking him seriously. This enraged Chu Lao, who declared he would teach her a lesson about respect. Qingtong appeared unconcerned. While Chun Zu wished he could argue with that old fool, Qingtong stopped him. Since she didn't like fighting, she decided to watch the show. She ordered the war slaves to present the accounts. "Since Chu Lao wants to stand up for her, then let's settle these accounts on behalf of your beloved disciple." She then threw Zhao Mu into Bai Lian's arms, leaving Bai Lian flustered and at a loss. When Chu Lao saw the contents of the accounts, he inwardly panicked. He tried to stop them but failed. He insisted that Qingtong fabricated the accounts, as none of the items listed were ever seen. Regarding Bai Lian, Qingtong knew her all too well. "Do you dare let me search your residence?" The war slaves were ordered to proceed to the residence. Bai Lian pinned all her hopes on Chu Lao, her heart pounding in her chest, her face paling. "Those things were all gifts from you." These words inadvertently incriminated her. Qingtong didn't miss the opportunity. "The Qianyu imperial family gave me those gifts. Why would I give them away? Do you expect me to return them to the imperial family?" Bai Lian was speechless, tears streaming down her face. "You're just jealous that my talent is greater than yours." Suddenly, a shout interrupted her cries. Throwing the people into the dungeon, Qingtong immediately asked the war slave to summon everyone. She wanted to give those who were watching a good show. Later, the men were locked up, but Lao begged to be released. It turned out that Lao was one of Wang Xifeng's loyal subordinates, and behind him stood the Qianyu Emperor's faction. Qingtong also learned from Zhan Enyu that Bai Lian had fled to Da Qinsheng Yuan Academy. Arriving at the dungeon, she happened to encounter the men begging the guards. Qingtong mocked them. "Your own father is being used as a shield, and you still want him to come and rescue you." The man, however, saw things differently. He believed it was all Ning Er's scheme. His eyes turned cold. He would not spare anyone who had harmed his grandfather, especially those orchestrating things behind the scenes. He also hurled insults at the man, calling him spineless for using his own father as a pawn. Lao, oblivious to the situation, still wanted to argue. Qingtong pulled out some pills from her pocket. The first war slave was ordered to give Luo Lao the pills. She also had the decoy released outside. Hearing this, Luo Lao panicked. After the man swallowed the pills, his power surged. However, if he used this power, it would backfire severely. If not used, he would turn into a beast. Luo Lao screamed in despair, "Ning, I will not forgive you." Qingtong ignored him. The next target was Bai Lian. Late that night, Qingtong was in her study, looking at a book. Zhan Enyu reported that Luo Shenning had returned to the Luo residence. A Qianyu branch academy instructor accompanied her. Furthermore, through unknown means, the instructor was deeply devoted to Qingtong. Hearing this news, Qingtong was intrigued and decided to investigate. She instructed Zhan Enyu to compile a list of the items the imperial family and royal clans had gifted her over the years. She intended to give Bai Lian a special gift in return. Meanwhile, Bai Lian paced anxiously in her room. She was convinced Qingtong wouldn't let her off the hook. Her father's disappearance was also Qingtong's doing. Chu Lao Ma was away, but if he dared to show up and cause trouble, she would make him pay dearly. Bai Lian feigned a pitiful expression, gaining Chu Lao's sympathy. He thought she was too kind, and that was why Qingtong bullied her. Suddenly, a crash echoed, startling them both. The Luo family plaque lay shattered on the ground. Qingtong, mounted on a tall horse, ordered the war slaves to break the plaque into pieces. She slapped Bai Lian, whose face was caked with makeup, calling herself Luo. The war slaves gleefully destroyed the plaque. Stop! This plaque was bestowed upon Miss by the Qianyu Branch Academy. Qingtong, however, was unmoved. Bai Lian reappeared, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. Big sister, what are you doing? They exchanged glances. The Luo family plaque was the only thing remaining. Since you've been expelled from the Luo family, do you think you're still worthy of hanging this plaque? Qingtong then instructed her men to put up a new plaque. The two characters Dao Fu on the plaque instantly enraged Bai Lian. Fearful and indignant, she shrieked, "You're my sister. How could you humiliate me like this? Don't you have a conscience?" Qingtong grew even more furious at Bai Lian's pretense. Bai Lian tearfully lamented, "Big sister, you're so ruthless. You drove me out of the Luo family, and now you're still pursuing me relentlessly. Look at what you've done to the Luo family. Grandpa's failing health is all because of you." Her acting was truly impressive. Qingtong would have been fine if she hadn't mentioned Luo Lao Yizi, but mentioning him made her want to tear Bai Lian apart. Zhan Enyu stepped forward. "What have you done? Do you dare to speak the truth?" Bai Lian's demeanor changed faster than the flip of a page. From fiercely defending her disciple and showing her affection, she instantly turned to receive a harsh slap. It turned out that Qingtong not only exposed her shameful acts, but also presented concrete evidence. Just a moment ago, when confronted, Bai Lian had cowardly hidden behind Chu Lao. He couldn't stand to see his beloved disciple being humiliated. To Qingtong, Bai Lian was nothing but an arrogant, domineering bully hiding behind the fifth prince's reputation, committing all sorts of atrocities. Qingtong scoffed. "Who is this mutt? The Luo family matters are none of your concern." Qingtong's disrespectful words were seized upon by Bai Lian, who then revealed that Chu Lao was an admissions instructor from the Qianyu Branch Academy. Inwardly, Qingtong mocked the old fool for being duped by the two-faced Bai Lian, allowing himself to be used as a shield. He must have been out of his mind. Qingtong sneered, completely disregarding him. This enraged Chu Lao, who then vowed to teach her what respect truly meant. Qingtong, however, showed no fear. While Chun Zhu desperately wanted to confront that old fool, Qingtong stopped him. She wasn't fond of fighting and preferred to watch the drama unfold. She ordered the war slaves to bring forth the account books. "Since Chu Lao wants to defend her, let's settle these accounts on behalf of your precious disciple." She threw Jiamu into Bai Lian's arms, causing Bai Lian to panic and fumble. When Chu Lao saw the accounts, he inwardly panicked. He tried to intervene, but it was too late. He insisted that Qingtong had fabricated the accounts, claiming that none of those items had ever existed. Qingtong, who knew Bai Lian inside and out, challenged her, "Do you dare to let me search your room?" The war slaves were dispatched to the residence. Bai Lian placed all her hope on Chu Lao, her heart racing, her face draining of color. "Those were all gifts you gave me." These words were her undoing. Qingtong didn't miss a beat. "The Qianyu imperial family gave me those things. Why would I gift them to you? Are you suggesting I should return them to the imperial family?" Bai Lian was rendered speechless, tears welling up. "You're just jealous because my talent surpasses yours." A sudden shout interrupted her act. "Why are you using your mother's money?" Bai Lian insisted that Qingtong forced her to accept countless treasures. Qingtong was thoroughly exasperated. "Do you think I'm stupid? Forcing you to take countless treasures? Am I the crazy one, or is it you?" She ordered the war slaves to confiscate everything. Anyone who dared to obstruct them would be considered an enemy of the Qianyu imperial family. Seeing her scheme unravel, Bai Lian pleaded with Chu Lao to help. Chu Lao, no longer hesitating, stood up. Her relentless pressure is just a ploy to retrieve the recommendation and the heirloom. He then accused Qingtong of disrespecting the imperial family, declaring she would never be allowed to enter the Qianyu Academy. Qingtong, however, remained indifferent. "That thing's been used. I don't want it. Entering the Qianyu Academy is based on merit, not on being a Luo." She fixed her gaze on Chu Lao's jade pendant. "I sent this the engagement token the fifth prince gave me." These words sent Chu Lao into a rage. He ripped off the pendant, and bellowed at Bai Lian, didn't you say it was a gift from the Qianyu imperial family? Bai Lian was utterly speechless, her face turning ashen. Qingtong burst into triumphant laughter. This is my limit. I'd like to see who truly reaches theirs. She slapped Bai Lian hard across the face. Chu Lao had never experienced such profound humiliation. Qingtong, never one to miss an opportunity to gloat, clapped her hands gleefully. She tossed the jade pendant aside and strode away triumphantly. She reveled in the fact that others couldn't touch her, while she could do whatever she pleased. Xiaozu appeared, clapping his hooves admiringly. Suddenly, the Juyu Huang realm seal began to tremble. Qingtong was taken aback, and Xiaozu was startled. The seal had been dormant for so long. Why the sudden activity? Qingtong was busy schooling Bai Lian, but in a flash, she disappeared. It seemed something was happening with the Juyu Huang realm seal. The cause of the disturbance was the man's return. Yi Qianming's mind was preoccupied with Qingtong. Back at the dark sacred region, thousands bowed before the returning sovereign. His presence instantly calmed the restless atmosphere. Feng Yu and Bai Shou exchanged a knowing look. Yu Lao teased him, thinking he had been lured away by the invitation. The man, however, merely raised his hand, displaying the impressive dragon fang sword on his finger. This sight astonished Yu Lao. He'd assumed the man was just making empty promises, but he had actually returned to the dark sacred region. Yu Lao, his eyes fixed on the ring, asked, "Don't tell me you went back just for this ring. Looks like that little invitation really hooked you." Xiaobei, seizing the opportunity, declared that the invitation wasn't a woman. "Why are you using your mother's money?" Bai Lian claimed Qingtong forced her to take countless treasures. Qingtong was exasperated. "Do I have rocks in my head? Forcing you to take countless treasures? Am I crazy, or are you?" She ordered the war slaves to take everything away. Anyone who dared to obstruct them would be considered an enemy of the Qianyu imperial family. Bai Lian, seeing her plan fail, pleaded with Chu Lao to intervene. Chu Lao, no longer hesitating, stood up. "The only reason she's pressuring you is to get back the recommendation, an heirloom." He further accused Qingtong of disrespecting the imperial family, and declared that she would never be allowed into the Qianyu Academy. Qingtong, however, remained unconcerned. "That thing has been used. I don't want it anymore. Getting into the Qianyu Academy depends on one's ability, not on being a Luo." She stared at Chu Lao's jade pendant. "Isn't this the engagement token the fifth prince gave me?" These words infuriated Chu Lao, who ripped off the pendant, and yelled at Bai Lian, "Didn't you say it was a gift from the Qianyu imperial family?" Bai Lian was now completely speechless, her face turning ashen. Qingtong burst into laughter. "This is my limit. I wonder who's really reached their limit." She slapped Bai Lian across the face. Chu Lao had never felt such humiliation. Qingtong, not forgetting to add insult to injury, clapped her hands in delight. Throwing the jade pendant away, she left the scene triumphantly. She loved seeing people unable to touch her while she could do whatever she pleased. Xiaozu appeared, also clapping his hooves in admiration. Suddenly, the Juyu Huang realm seal began to tremble. Qingtong was shocked. Xiaozu was startled. The seal had been quiet for so long, why was it suddenly acting up? Qingtong was busy lecturing Bai Lian, but in an instant, she vanished into thin air. It turned out that something had happened to the Juyu Huang realm seal. The reason for the disturbance was the man's return. Currently, Yi Qianming's thoughts were consumed by Qingtong. Back in the dark sacred region, thousands of people bowed before the sovereign. His return instantly cleared the air. Feng Yu and Bai Shou exchanged a knowing glance. Yu Lao even teased him, thinking he had been lured away by the invitation. The man, however, simply raised his hand, revealing the striking dragon fang sword on his finger. This scene shocked Yu Lao. Just as Xiaobei was about to stammer out an explanation, Yi Qianming glared at him, silencing him with a look. Yu Lao continued, observing the man's flustered reaction. "So, it seems that little invitation really did capture your heart." Xiaobei urgently tried to deny it, but Feng Yu intervened, explaining that Qingtong didn't understand Ming Zun's feelings. From her perspective, Ming Zun was probably just pursuing her. This explanation only infuriated Yi Qianming further. "I not only told her my name, but I also bathed with her, allowed her to touch me freely, and even gave her the Juyu Huang realm sword. Was that not enough, really?" Feng Yu's mouth twitched, at a loss for words with this clueless sovereign. Feng Yu tried to explain again. From Qingtong's perspective, Your special treatment of her is simply appreciation, not affection. Yi Qianming stubbornly insisted. Do you expect me to admit I like her? I, the dignified Ming Zun, how can I possibly utter such words? Stop it, Feng Yu pleaded, not daring to look him in the eye. He was dejected, unsure what he had done wrong. Seeing the sovereign's increasingly gloomy demeanor, Feng Yu ventured, perhaps Qingtong's way of thinking is different. To her, your royal status might simply mean you're someone pursuing her. This advice prompted Yi Qianming to reconsider. How could he make the woman reciprocate his feelings? At that moment, Qingtong was wandering through the red light district. The fake ring shed crafted impressed even Chen Zhu. She had designed the fake ring to absorb her spiritual energy and alter its aura to become undetectable. After the fake ring was finished, she resumed her Qingtong disguise. Chen Zhu couldn't help but complain, are you afraid he won't come looking for you? You're practically advertising yourself using Qingtong's identity. Qingtong, however, had her own reasons. After emptying the Qianyu imperial family's treasury, she needed to sell the goods quickly. Chen Zhu muttered under his breath, you're playing with fire again. Suddenly, she overheard people discussing how the Qianyu imperial family's protector, Bei Dao, had been challenged. In their pursuit of the culprit, the imperial family had invited Chu Lao to intervene, but he was severely injured by a mysterious Sheng Zun expert. This had caused them to fear Ming Zun. Both Qingtong and Chen Zhu were stunned. When did he become so powerful? Chen Zhu scoffed, look who's talking. A Sheng Zun. You're dreaming. But after thinking it over, Qingtong realized that the only person capable of injuring the imperial family's protector and scaring Chu Lao was that man. A chilling thought struck her. Juwu Mountain. Ming Zun, could they be the same person? Qingtong's blood ran cold. Since the stolen goods had been dealt with by Yi Qianming, she should leave these items for him. Not far away, the Jizun assassins were watching Qingtong. They naturally knew they were being followed and proceeded cautiously towards the main city. Seeing Qingtong enter the assassins' territory, the assassins were puzzled. She suddenly appeared on the city wall. Are you looking for me? With a casual wave of her hand, she activated a seemingly ordinary confinement formation. However, the assassins merely scoffed. In their eyes, killing this woman was as easy as crushing an ant. Qingtong sized them up, wondering why the Jizun assassin guild was targeting her, Zi Guitong, for this identity. The assassins, however, didn't know that the formation was merely a diversion. She just wanted an excuse to kill. A sinister smile played on her lips. She summoned a sword. The assassins, who had been nonchalant just moments ago, were now on high alert. By the time they realized what was happening, Qingtong had vanished, transforming into a colorful blur. Needles rained down from above. The leader instantly became a pincushion. Qingtong coldly questioned, I'll give you one chance. Who sent you? The assassins were shocked by Qingtong's prowess. She was clearly only at the Wujiang level, yet the power she wielded. Qingtong, however, didn't wait for an answer and prepared to kill them with her dual swords. Chen Zhu watched the two fight, bewildered. He didn't understand what the woman was doing. She had divine weapons and king-level strength, so why was she allowing the man to pressure her? Qingtong was growing increasingly frustrated. She was running out of power and could collapse at any moment. Suddenly, Zhu Gen felt a pang of regret, remembering Yi Qianming's instruction to protect Qingtong. He understood now. This woman couldn't be harmed, otherwise, they were all doomed. He channeled his spiritual fire, which blazed intensely. A red-haired youth suddenly materialized. Qingtong noticed Chen Zhu's transformation. Just as the youth was about to attack, a cold voice stopped him. Don't interfere. He, too, was shocked. It turned out everything was orchestrated by him. He had merely used the assassins as pawns. A grey-robed man leaped down. The assassins were stunned. The woman was choosing to fight here. Spiritual power surged into his sword. First move of Zhan Qianju. Bo Qian. It was Yi Qianming who had hired the assassins. Trapped within the formation, the man screamed in agony, struggling in vain. Qingtong inwardly rejoiced. She hadn't expected the moves Yi Qianming had taught her to be so effective. Chen Zhu, crying, ran to him, interrupting Qingtong, who was still reveling in her victory. She almost died. Don't you care? He pinched Chen Zhu's face. I just felt a surge of power from her. Are you saying I should be concerned? Besides, why would I care about that useless idiot? Did you really think she was going to die? Qingtong's strength had somewhat recovered and now hovered at the mid-level Shengzun realm. She felt uneasy. If she didn't recover her strength quickly, she would be in mortal danger. Suddenly, Chunzu shouted, "What are you doing?" The sudden eruption of spiritual energy startled everyone. Qingtong, unaware of the danger, was busy with the detoxification. Chunzu's excessive actions greatly displeased Xiao Qianming, who was inwardly fuming. How dare he touch his beloved? Feng Yu noticed something was wrong, while Xiaobei exclaimed, "Master, you're flushed all over. It's too hot here." "Shut up!" Yi Qianming snapped, already scolding. For the third time, Feng was unable to stop himself. He ordered everyone to leave immediately. "That woman is up to something again. What does she take me for? If it were truly him, wouldn't he be there in person?" One day, the two were walking when they heard terrified screams. The two instinctively reacted. They found the same severely poisoned man from before. The man, however, didn't resist. Having been seen, he was prepared to leave the academy, but Instructor Jiang stepped in and allowed the man to stay, stating that he was interested in the man's physique. This made Xiao Qianming and Beng Wainan's faces darken. "So, you're interested in other people's bodies. Are you also interested in mine?" Beng Wainan, terrified, retreated repeatedly.